Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to Truth Warrior. So happy to be back with you. Today, we're talking on Thursday, November 27th, 2025. We're continuing to document the madness and also a fascinating history that I think a lot of people are unaware of, especially where I live here in Canada. And boy, are we going to go down the Canadian rabbit hole today. I've wanted to do a show on this book that I've had in my library for, oh my goodness, maybe 10, 12 years now. I've had this book for a while. I call it my blue book. Here it is right here. It's literally a blue file folder of photocopied pages of the book we are going to go through today. And it is entitled New World Order Corruption in Canada. This was written in the 90s, if you can believe it or not. When was the date exactly? 1994, was published in Toronto, Canada, by Professor Robert O'Driscoll and Elizabeth Elliot, and they have numerous contributing writers that contribute to the book. So each chapter, there's different authors. They feature the work of Dr. John Coleman, who wrote the book Committee of 300. I've done some shows on the past about his work, and I want to do more because there's so many things we can get into with Dr. John Coleman, of course. But the reason this is going to be relevant is because of the series that I've been doing on this show over the past month or 2 months now. You can go back and get the archive. We went into the occult history of totalitarianism. We did 2 parts on that. Got into some of these other elements and aspects that are related to that in other shows. And of course, just go back in the archive and you can get caught up on really the big picture. But even if you haven't seen those shows, don't go anywhere. You're going to learn a lot that you may not have learned about the hidden history of Canada. And why is this relevant? Well, because here we are living in Canada today in 2025 with basically all of the proof we need that many of the theories that were put out by, we're talking university professors, insiders, researchers, authors, as far back as the 90s, are actually coming into effect. And we live in that time right now. That's what I think, is that we're in the implementation phase of a lot of what was predicted and written down by many of these roundtable groups, these think tanks, these power organizations. I've been calling this group that's at the top, this sort of steering committee that has this agenda, not just for Canada, not just for America, not just for the West, but for the world. I've been documenting this for a while. And I think that as a Canadian, born and raised myself, I have been trying to learn more about Canada's involvement in this whole New World Order project. Okay. And we're calling it the New World Order because that's who the original authors of this agenda called it themselves. That's their term for it. So I always love it when I get the eye roll from people when I bring up the term, because the term, like so many, has been turned into a propaganda term, actually, so that when you use it, it loses its meaning because everybody just cracks jokes at it and they don't want to know anything more, right? But that's what it was called. It was called the New World Order. It's been called that many times. And actually, if you get into ancient history, it's also been named that by various empires and those who are striving for world dominion or world power. So it's so old, it's new again. And here we are. And I believe we're at also a junction point that these authors in this book may not have seen, although they were many of them were very positive in their overall analysis, saying, oh, we do see people that are paying attention and we do hope that people can wake up, right? But they couldn't have foreseen so many things that have happened since this book was published. And that's where we come in, you and me, doing this show here together today, where all you got to do is look at the information that was presented back then by some of the OG conspiracy writers. And these guys wrote on a very specific conspiracy, by the way. It wasn't just like these were the people that just bought into everything that's going around on the internet these days. A lot of it is wild and outlandish. And it's done that way on purpose to camouflage the true criminal conspiracies that are active in our world, especially at the high tables of geopolitics and local politics. And so I wanted to get into this from a Canadian perspective. But if you're tuning in from somewhere else in the world, stay tuned, because Canada is now becoming an example for the world in terms of in many ways what not to do and what to be aware of, as this same organizational structure, the same agenda is being installed bit by bit in all of these different countries, especially when it comes to Western countries right now. It's like the agenda, the people that were a part of this great establishment they were trying to build up, great in terms of size and power, not in terms of virtue. Uh, they had already conquered the rest of the world long ago, and the West was the target. And now America would be the final target that must be removed in order for this world government or world parliament or world association of central dictatorship, the technocracy, however you want to term it. It's had many terms applied to it. We're all talking about the same bag of oats here. In order for that to be successful, all representations of freedom and reason and individual rights and all these things must be removed, because you can't have a global new world order or centralized power structure that is dictating every single element of human life to the entire population of planet Earth, or what's left of it after these guys get done what their very insidious agenda outlines. Um, you have to remove anything that's an obstacle, and you got to attack the ideas. And this is where we get into the story of the infiltration versus invasion type of strategy that was selected by these big steering committees and these 300 committees and these roundtable groups. Is that they had basically designed this plan over a long period of time to do this sort of long march of the institutions and use various factions that were already biting for their power, different gangs, different cliques, different political parties, different political movements that all think they're fighting their own independent goal for whatever future world they want and the power that they want. When we're getting into the high table, we're talking about the vultures that sit there and just look at the rats in the maze fighting it out, and they're taking notes and they're designing something that is far more advanced than most of us could realize. And so I've covered that sort of history loosely in the past few episodes. The last one, we got into some really, really good stuff, getting into the work of G. Edward Griffin, where he was exposing it from his perspective. And what I like to do is just refresh everybody's memory in an environment of a lot of newbies coming in and suddenly getting major followings, and then going out there and trying to share, what I think is a very I don't know. It's just it's a version of this story that is very lacking, because a lot of these top podcasters and influencers out there that are talking about any of this type of conspiracy stuff, they don't cite the greats. They don't go back to the originals. They don't go back to the people that I'm referencing. And so I've got some questions about why that might be. But I just tell people, if they're always like, who do I trust? Who's right? Who's wrong? I just go, well, go with who predicted it. Who is correct in their assessment of the situation? Who gave you the most receipts? Who gave you the most source material to go and look up independently? Who is always encouraging you to research independently and to not just follow every trend that goes up on your social media feeds. These are the places that you go to. And you can see the sincerity in their work. And even though there's flaws, like there's many flaws in this book because of the fact that they're in limited scope. We're talking 1990, early 1990s. These are the people that, early 1990s, we don't have really like the big internet push. We don't have social media. We don't have all the tools. We don't have AI bots. There's no chat GPT. There's no online university courses or online libraries and all that kind of stuff. These are the people that go do the groundwork and actually go and research this through the archives, through the microfilms, through the newspapers, the Reader's Digests, the statements, the white papers, the memoirs. There's so many writings that come from these people at the top where they're basically openly bragging about what they want to do. And when you go with what they said they were going to do, and then look at where we are and the war that we're involved in right now to preserve freedom in this world, it's striking. And even as I was preparing this show, it just keeps striking me how accurate the predictions were. And how could that be if this was all just a bunch of nonsense, just a bunch of crazy tinfoil hat stuff? How could it be so accurate? So hats off to those of you who've been doing this for a long time. Some of this is going to be revisiting old ground, but I believe that we live in an age where a lot of people are waking up. We got a lot of young people coming into the mix, and we have to keep revisiting and reminding people this wasn't figured out just yesterday or in 2020 or whatever. Like, this has been figured out for a long time because it's been spoken of and the policies have been being implemented for a long time. And there's those of us out there who've been watching this a long time and continuing to research and refining what we're looking at and getting more data and then seeing things come to fruition, realizing where there was errors in the past, because we're looking at a deep mystery here. We're kind of peeking over the windowsill to see what all the adults are doing, right? And so there's going to be errors in some of the work. There's also people mixing in their belief system, their worldview into their analysis of the data. So when you're a researcher, let me just encourage you on this front. You're going to find, as I've found, that you might come across contradictions or things that might throw you off the scent because of the sort of individual coloring that everybody does when they look at data, and then they start applying their mind to it and their look at it. I do it, you do it, we all do it. It's a natural thing. To truly do good research and stay objective about it, you have to be able to separate that from the data, the actual data. So even as I go through and I give you my little anecdotes and my little jokes and little quips or whatever, don't let any of that phase you. Think of the names of the people I'm citing. Look at the source material that I'm going to present to you. Look at the reality of the world you live in right now, especially if you're living in Canada, but this would go for everywhere. And then you just tell me, is it all a coincidence that it just so happened to align perfectly like a big giant jigsaw puzzle all at the same time, right? Or is it planned to happen that way? Has it been planned to happen that way for some time? And were the conspiracy theorists, at least in this category, were they actually right this whole time? Which I think they were. So, and of course, always to say the disclaimer, don't confuse this analysis of true conspiracy history, okay, factual history, with conspiracy theory as an entire package deal that you have to adopt now every single conspiracy theory you hear from anybody. That's just absolutely ridiculous. You need to keep your critical thinking caps on at all times, because there's a lot of amateurs going on in this space. There's a lot of people that just come up with half-baked theories. They throw them around. They remix it with this documented conspiracy history. And then there's a lot of infiltration and highly financed groups that are out there trying to talk your language and bring these brings in, but then twist it and then try to give you a totally different and false conclusion on it. So beware of all those pitfalls. Stick with the great minds, stick with the people that have been consistent this entire time, and always go to the source material and the data and look at it for yourself. So there's my little preamble. Guys, I have so much reading in front of me today, so I'm going to do my best to get through it all. But before we do, there's a part of this book that brings up Maurice Strong. We're going to get to know some of the Canadian contributors to this big globalist agenda, as we call it. And Canada has had a very significant role, even though it was under the radar for most of the world for a long time. And if you're wondering why Canada has become such an amazing example of how quickly a country can start to implode economically, in terms of the division of the people, in terms of the level of tyranny and lies and deception that's going on in government. The reason that it's become such an example is twofold. One, we have a very apathetic, highly conditioned, highly unresponsive public in general in Canada. It's always been that way. We've been spoiled. We're like spoiled brats over here in many ways. We've always had that highty-tighty British stare down your nose at the rest of the world kind of mentality, especially America. Like the amount of propaganda the Canadian public has swallowed about hating America. America's the enemy. We're better than America. You've adopted that from the British Empire, of which you are a member, and you're really run by a private corporation and a privy council that is beholden to occult forces. And you got to start wondering why that whole rhetoric, instead of thinking of America as brothers in arms in this fight to preserve freedom, we look at them as an enemy. And I believe that that was also by design. And there's many stages that we have to go through with Canadian history. So we're going back to like Brian Mulroney and Jean Chrétien, some of these guys, going back to the Fabian infiltration in Ottawa. We're going to be covering just how this went down in the universities, how it was infiltrated, and how this whole thing works from the Canadian perspective. And I just hope it's valuable for you. But they brought up Maurice Strong because Maurice Strong is a Canadian, really, really big figure, very wealthy, big time with the UN, the Club of Rome, the whole thing. And as they start getting into it, and it'll be later, about halfway through the reading I'm going to do, we'll get back to it. But I made a clip that comes from the great Dr. Stan Monteith, who's a great author on this subject. And he did a presentation years ago and talked specifically about this. And I put that in my Cult of the Medics documentary series. If you haven't seen it, go and check me out on Substack. I've got it there for free for you. You can get it on my Rumble channel. You can go to cultofthemedics.com and it's all linked there. You'll find it. It's out there. And you want to look for chapter 9 if you want to get the full context of how this fits into the whole medical industrial complex. But it's going to fit into this presentation. So I wanted to play this little clip for you and take note of the quote that comes from Lord Bertrand Russell from the Royal Society right as I open up this clip. Take note of that quote. It's very relevant. And then listen to what Dr. Monteith has to share. And then I'm going to start our reading journey here for you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Here we go.
It's really something called the Club of Rome. And you can actually pull this logo down off the internet site where we got it. And basically, their statement is that their purpose is to act as an international non-official catalyst of change. Now, this is taken from their website below. Another new development was the decision to invite prominent world figures who share the club's concern to become honorary members, although their positions may prevent them from taking a public stance, as in the case of the Queen of the Netherlands or the King and Queen of Spain. They can and do give valued moral support. Among the others are former President Gorbachev, former President Richard von Weizsäcker of Germany, the first president of newly democratic Czechoslovakia, Václav Havel, the president of Hungary, the president of Argentina, etc., etc. Here, some of the most wealthy and powerful men in the world meet to plan the future. Nations. Now, you probably believe Kofi Annan is the Secretary General and leads the United Nations, but he is simply a figurehead for the man who really runs the UN. His name is Maurice Strong, a member of the Club of Rome. And Maurice Strong, of course, it was the first Secretary General of the First Earth Summit in 1972, the second Secretary General of the Earth Summit in 1992, and the Secretary General of the Third Earth Summit in 1997. He has, of course, put out the Global Biodiversity Assessment Report, which really calls for the total disruption of Western civilization. He's been quoted as saying the only way to save the Earth is to destroy Western civilization. He has a little farm in Colorado, it's called Baca, about 100,000 acres there, where occultists from all over the world meet. They have witches, they have medicine men, they have shamans, they have Satanists, they have Shirley MacLaine. Barry Goldwater, on page 280 of his book, With No Apologies, basically said this: "It is intended to be the vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interests." In other words, all throughout the world, they're going to seize banking and commercial interests, but they're going to do it by seizing control of the political government of the United States. Well, that's a pretty strong statement. You would think that people would be talking about. If anybody wanted to seize control of this political government of the United States, that suggests they really want a dictatorship, or maybe they already have a dictatorship.
Or maybe they already have a dictatorship. Let's see if they already have a clandestine dictatorship that they're just hoping to bring out to the public square. If you remember in my previous show, which I got to say, I was really proud of how it came out. I'm really grateful for all of you. I got so many positive messages from the last show. I was overwhelmed with it. And so I just want to thank everybody for sending in your very kind comments and the contributions. People send me good links to assist as well. That was great. I just want to say I really appreciate all of you for that. I even appreciate any of the criticisms. That's great as well. But what we got into with that was when G. Edward Griffin was breaking down, starting back with good old Adam Weishaupt in, back in the 1700s when he formed the Bavarian Illuminati. And he goes through how actually for people that think that this Illuminati conspiracy thing is just all a bunch of Hollywood, well, how do you explain the Bavarian government actually releasing the internal documents, or at least part of the internal documents, to the public? You can actually get access to it. And so Ed Griffin got access to it and started studying basically the rhetoric, the arguments that were posed by this Illuminati group. The way that they structured their organizations is they discuss it openly in all these letters and communications back and forth with various members. The members of this group are not your local commie club of a bunch of people just trying to overthrow the government. These are very, very high-flying elites in various elements of society that are coming together to overthrow the government and then install a total new world order system. And by infiltrating the Masonic lodges, they were able to utilize the compartmentalized structure of the Masonic lodges as a way of containing and hiding this actual criminal cabal. And so we go through all of that. And one thing Ed Griffin brought up was the structure is based on rings within rings, rings within rings, rings of power, right? And of course, you've got the top cheese, whoever the high table are, the elect, the few, who are very small in number at the tippy top. And that's the central ring that dictates down to the ring below them, which is made up of more people. Then there's more and more and more. And they call them rings because they are round tables. Of course, we went into Cecil Rhodes Trust. We went into the Rhodes Trust. The reason I brought up the Rhodes Trust in that episode and did that entire historical deep dive was because our own former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, Chrystia Freeland, the freezing bank accounts person, has been promoted out of politics as now the chairman and CEO and warden of the Rhodes Trust. And that caught my attention, of course, because of all the research I had done on people like Ed Griffin and these other writers who wrote about the Rhodes Trust and the history of Cecil Rhodes and all of that. So I'm not going to rehash it. Please go back and watch that episode, and it will help you as we go through this one. But the reason we're doing rings within rings, and he's talking about a clandestine order that's already in effect. They already have a dictatorship of a sort, but they're trying to improve it and they're trying to make it public. That's been spoken about by many, many, including the authors we're going to get into today. I just thought it was interesting that Stan had brought that up. And then regarding the quote from Lord Bertrand Russell at the beginning, where he's giving it in a very short statement, he's saying that in order to have world socialism, which is the model loosely that they wanted to build it on. I mean, think about it. He's writing this back in the early 1900s, right? So in order to have world socialism, you need far less human beings on the planet in order to sustain it. Okay? So when they're telling you that, and then all of your governments are pushing for essentially a global, you can't even just say pure socialist. You could say socialist was like I call it like the occult socialism that eventually birthed all these political variants of socialism, which are just different flavors of the same poison. There's a bigger package behind it than what average people think of as socialism, which is why this is such a minefield to get through, because you're constantly bogged down with having to redefine things. So, because people have been miseducated by their schoolmasters, by their teachers, by the media, right? So you got to kind of catch them up on all these points. So I don't want to belabor that, but basically, when you fast forward from those statements from Russell to Carroll Quigley, Professor Carroll Quigley, who we spoke about in the last episode as well, he's basically saying that at this stage, these elites had decided on a hybridized system where they took the best for them for consolidating power, the best ingredients that would help them achieve this on a world scale, what they had achieved by installing these occult doctrines on the national scale in various countries. Okay, so they had tried these experiments in different countries, right? Venezuela, North Korea, China, these different ones. And then there was like the fascist wing of it. And then there was the different versions of it, even versions of it in America that they tried out. And then they basically consolidated the best of the best, made a hybrid system, went, this is going to be the one for the world. This will be the way we achieve a ring of power for the world. And the only way to do it is to vastly decrease the human population. And that's where you get the whole birth of the climate thing and how humans are bad. The Club of Rome declares openly that humanity is the number one enemy of humanity and the earth. And that's how you're going to get that rhetoric coming out of all your climatista groups now today. It's what they're teaching your kids in school. And then it births a whole bunch of other, basically a multi-pronged attack system, a multi-pronged payload of various elements of this central agenda held by the inner circle that would then hit the public ring, which is at the bottom of the heap, right? The public square, as we call it. And to the public, it would look like just random separate ideologies that are coming in that are just so happening to be completely transforming the premise, the philosophies, the ideas, and then eventually the systems themselves, far and away from the original premise of what was founding Western civilization or any of our nations, right? In terms of, especially when it comes to freedom and sovereignty. So that's the backdrop. All right. And with that backdrop, let's zoom in on Canada for a minute. And this one, I've brought this up before. There was an author, just trying to remember his name here. I think it's at the bottom. I don't have the name on fresh in my mind, but he wrote this blog in Canada for some time called Inside the Featherbed File. Okay. And he had these different chapters, almost like reading a book. Like each blog post was just like a continuation of different elements of the research that this independent journalist had done. I believe this person also had experience in mainstream journalism, but then realized, oh my God, that's not journalism. So I'm going to go do my own journalism. This happens to, some of the good ones. And he wrote about this Fabian socialist penetration into Canada. And so let's go through it. Let me just make this bigger so I can see it. So here he's saying, this was published back in like 2015. He says this. So this is Fabian socialist penetration in Ottawa. At this stage, the reader might begin to wonder how in the world I've neglected to mention Pierre Elliott Trudeau and the clique which surrounds him, including Gerard Pelletier, Jean Chrétien, Jean Marchand, and a few others who were elected on the Liberal Party ticket from 1968 on, but previously were identified in Quebec with socialist and Marxist groups. I shall have a word to say about them shortly. At least these infiltrators were elected. But how about that coterie of assorted revolutionaries, Soviet agents, former NDP socialists, and unilateral disarmers who, although they were never elected, have held and still hold influential positions in the upper civil service, in ambassadorial posts abroad, and in top positions of the CBC, the CRTC, the National Film Board, CIDA, etc. Guys, this is written in 2015. Let me know if any bells are going off about how this applies to what's exactly happening right now. People such as Jean-Louis Gagnon, Al Johnson, Graham Spry, Bob Bryce, Jacques Roy, William Bill Lee, Hazen Size, Alan Gottlieb, Mark Starowich, Robert Rabinovich, Ed Clark, Michael Pitfield, John Grierson, Bernhard Ostry, S. Scott Reed, Chester Roning, and so many others who were able to worm their way into key positions in the establishment and keep these positions even when there was a change of government in Ottawa. So he started to notice that we were seeing the same faces always showing up, and they were moving around in different cabinet positions or even some of the corporate positions as well. There's sort of like a little backdoor thing happening where they're having great influence and power, and it wouldn't matter. Conservative, liberal, NDP, Quebec, Bloc Québécois, it doesn't matter. Same group being part of this whole steering committee, right? So these are the things you got to look for. You got to look for the patterns. So he continues, long before the three wise men. Oh, come on. Don't do this to me now. Hold on. There we go. Long before the three wise men from Quebec, which are Trudeau, Pelletier, and Merchant, took over the federal Liberal Party in a typical Fabian socialist coup d'etat, the civil service, the CBC, the National Film Board, and other crown agencies, it's all crown, man, had been deeply penetrated by a group of Fabian socialists, most of them graduates of the London School of Economics. That's going to come up periodically. The most valuable short work on the deadly subversion of the free society by the Fabian socialists is Eric Butler's The Fabian Socialist Contribution to the Communist Advance. This 44-page booklet is listed at the back of this booklet. It's essential reading for all who want to be equipped to really defend freedom. Now, guys, I have that link. I'm going to read from that book he's mentioning in a second, just the intro. And I have the link. I got the PDF of it. He's right. If you live in Canada, if you live anywhere in the world and you value freedom and you want to know who started this, or at least who were the knights that rode in pretending to be shining armored knights, but ended up being the black hand of the Illuminist occultists to come in here and gouge our economy, totally restructure our societies, and help get Canada prepared to be absorbed into the world order. You got to read the book. Okay. So I'll put links afterwards. If you guys really want to get into the links I share regularly, go follow me on X. You can follow me at Truth Warrior Dad, and I post this kind of stuff all the time. Okay. Now he continues. The famous French writer Julien Benda created a sensation in the 30s when he wrote a book which became a classic, The Treason of the Intellectuals. A similar book could be written in the Canadian context, as it has been largely our universities which have produced the leadership of the whole Marxist conspiracy, both the revolutionary communist leadership and the elite echelons of the gradualist Fabian socialists. So what he's going to get into here is that you got this like Fabian socialist elitist group, right, that are now using the revolutionary Marxists and communists as their little army, their little Trojan horse army to infiltrate the key positions, because they know they've got them controlled. So all the little independent communist groups that think they're just like, acting independently, you're controlled by far higher forces than you can possibly imagine. Okay. And if you're not into hierarchies, you probably need to reinvestigate what team you're on, because you are literally a part of the Rings Within Rings network, and you're being used as what Stalin referred to as the useful idiots. Okay. Now we got to get above that, the useful idiot level, and get into the top level. And then it just keeps going above them. Next, he says, the COINTERN agent, O.D. Skelton, to whom we have already referred, had been a professor at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Another notorious COINTERN agent, Stanley B. Ryerson, alias E. Roger, of the famous early Toronto Ryerson family, recruited the future leadership of the Quebec communist apparatus from among his students at Sir George Williams University in Montreal, including Guy Caron, Kent Rowley, Madeleine Parent, Camille Dion, and John Switzman. However, it was Professor Frank Underhill, tutored by such Fabian masters as Harold Lansky, or Lasky, is it? Yeah, Harold Lasky. That's a name you should write down. And George Bernard Shaw, another one, when he was at Balliol College, who later was responsible for hundreds of his pupils being able to infiltrate the civil services of both Ottawa and the provinces. In an article in the Toronto Daily Star of November 27th, 1969, referring to the testimonial dinner given old-time Liberal Party advisor Frank Underhill, Peter Newman wrote this, quote, "They were all there, the big L and the small L Liberals, Lester Pearson, Frank Scott, Eugene Forsey, Bob Bryce, S. Scott Reed, and Graham Spry among them, all moving out of public life now and watching their ideology being assaulted on the outside by the radical young and on the inside by the technocrats." Now, further on in the same article, we read, quote, While at Balliol himself from 1911 to 1914, so this is going way back, Underhill joined the Fabian Society and came under the influence of Bernard Shaw. And then the significant revelation, quote, Underhill drafted the original Regina Manifesto, which launched the CCF. So it's an old familiar story of the Fabian socialist who works openly in the socialist camp and then infiltrates the Liberal Party. Most of those mentioned above were in this category, with Bob Bryce being the gray eminence of the federal civil service and Graham Spry acknowledged as the father of the CBC. So you want to know why your institutions, your universities, your media are churning out ideological, what do they call them? The ideological elect, which is our young generations. They're converting their minds to go along with this dogma. Well, we're getting into the actual, some of the names, all right? And there are some names I omitted because I got to watch my ass, but you know, you can keep researching this on your own. Now, this is the one I want to show you. I'm going to bring it up full screen for you. This is that 44-page book by Eric Butler. It's called The Fabian Socialist Contribution to the Communist Advance. He's from Australia. I'll get you the dates. I think he wrote this in the 60s, but he's got a little quote here. This is a quote from Professor Harold Laski, famous Fabian socialist theoretician, in his appreciation of the Communist Manifesto for the Labour Party, which was written in 1948. The quote is, "Who, remembering that these policies of high taxation and centralization of credit were the demands of the manifesto issued by Marx and Engels in 1848, can doubt our common inspiration." Our common inspiration. So there you've got it. This is the stuff I live for, the actual horse's mouth quotes, where Professor Harold Laski, who's a famous Fabian socialist, is talking about how the communist advance and the Fabian advance are the same advance. All right? Interesting. And of course, there's their symbol. It just so happens to be a wolf in sheep's clothing of all possible symbols they could have selected, which is very interesting to me. And so here it is. This is just the introduction. I just wanted to read it to you. So he sort of summarizes it here. So Eric Butler says this booklet is an expansion of a paper I gave at the 1963 annual seminar of the Australian League of Rights. The considerable interest in this paper clearly indicated that the subject matter of the paper should be dealt with more extensively. This booklet does not pretend to be an exhaustive examination of what is a vast and complex subject, but it does seek to provide sufficient evidence to demonstrate that, so far from providing a defense against the communist advance, the Fabian socialist movement has materially aided and abetted that advance. It is not suggested, however, that every person attracted to the Fabian socialist movement is a conscious agent of the communist conspiracy. Far from it. The truth is that many sincere and well-meaning people, concerned about the problems of society and lacking any clear understanding of the values upon which Western civilization has been erected, have been attracted towards the idea of extending state power, but have selected what has appeared to be the more moderate approach of the Fabian socialists, as distinct from the more openly revolutionary approach of the Marxist socialists. But once those balances in society, which protect the individual against tyranny, are upset to a certain stage by the many legal techniques of concentrating power devised by the Fabians, Parliament itself could be used to bring the communists to power. Khrushchev clearly had this in mind when, in his historic report to the 20th Communist Congress in Moscow in February 14, 1956, he raised the question, quote, of whether it is possible to go over to socialism by using parliamentary means. And of course, Canada has a parliamentary system along with Australia and the UK. This is a question which must concern all those who want to gain an understanding of all policies which today aid the worldwide forces of revolution. It is hoped that this booklet will make a contribution towards developing this understanding. And yes, that was written by Eric Butler in Melbourne, February 1964. So we can't say we haven't been warned, my friends. None of us were paying attention. Now, here we are. This is the book. I have cherished this book for some time. It is obviously a photocopy. I don't think you can get a physical form of this book anymore. It didn't exist when I went to get it. I think I got this around 2014, 20, no, maybe, I think it was around 2013, 2012, 2013. I got it. I got it at a bookstore in Toronto, Ontario, which I don't think is operational anymore after the lockdowns. Uh, a friend of mine, Patrick, ran it, and it was called Conspiracy Culture. And you could go in there, and he had bookshelves of all of these books. And I stocked mine with as many of them as I could. Sadly, I don't think the bookstore exists anymore. But I asked him, I went up, like I go to every bookstore, and I'm like, hey, I like your selection. You got anything rare in the back that's more expensive? You got anything kind of off the, I'm always looking for the unique stuff. And he just pulls this big blue folder out, and he goes, there you go. That's the one you need. And I went, okay, corruption in Canada. Oh, shoot. Right. And I still revisit it. And the more I revisit it, my mind is always blown. So that is the book we are going to continue with here. And so let me get into it for you. Okay. Guys, there were so many things I wanted to throw into this, but I'd be here for 27 hours. So I just kind of got some clippings that we can open with. I have a feeling I'm going to turn this one into a bit of a series, and we'll just keep going through different parts of the book. But we'll start with this. And I found this to be a little bit interesting here. And it's talking in a section called Robotics and Electrical Energy. Okay. Now, interesting opening statement here for those that are in the know. All esoteric tradition posits the existence of 19 hierarchies in the universe, 9 hierarchies of darkness, 9 hierarchies of light. Humanity poised between the two, the only hierarchy possessing free will, is a kind of filter, coil, or resistant conductor between the forces of light and the forces of darkness, a fulcrum or balancing point for the forces of the universe to investigate themselves. The balance of darkness and light within an individual at any particular time is a mysterious matter of adjustment from within. The word in man for yes or no, what traditional religions call conscience. In electricity, there are 2 main principles. First, the gap or chasm over which the current jumps has to be unpredictable and unreliable. Second, the current always follows the path of least resistance. This is how the spark is created. To attempt to make what is unreliable reliable, or what is uncertain certain, is to try to control the mystery of light springing from darkness and all that combination connotes. And by the way, that subject was basically the debate in philosophy and theology for all of human history. The spark, as a consequence, has no impetus to jump, even to exist. Man is reduced from a quantum to a horizontal world. Eternal light and eternal dark become in essence one, and there is no life in between. Color, according to Goethe, is born in the meeting of darkness and light. The very fact they brought Goethe up on this is pretty astounding to me. Lightning is produced from the press of darkness on darkness, a frightening miracle producing the opposite of what one would expect, white light. 2 negatives produce a positive. So he's just opening up the book, giving you some background into, I just thought that was just pretty amazing that he's getting into some of the mythology, some of the philosophy, some of the science. I talk about these kind of things all the time on the show, and many of the great writers that get into that aspect, but he's getting into it in this section of the book before opening up about the specifics of this dark New World Order agenda. And the reason they do it in the book is to show that, as I've been saying this entire time, that evil is not the only force at work in this world, just as darkness is not the only force, or magnetism is not the only force, or like we live in a pretty bizarre universe that has laws and things that govern it. And as we see those laws being demonstrated in nature, or even it's what produced all the technology we have, was the knowledge of how this whole thing works. We're also learning about human consciousness, your human body, the electromagnetism, and everything that powers you as a living being. So that's interesting. And this is what a lot of people believe is part of this agenda, is about hijacking literally the photonic light that we call consciousness and redirecting it towards a particular agenda. So this is not new. There's a lot of different versions of this ideology. And you're not only going to read about this from what I call the good guys, the people that would talk about this as just the general principles by which you can empower yourself. But you're also going to hear about it when you read chapters from the bad guys who've read the same material and then concluded that, well, we can use these laws of nature and these laws of human consciousness and psychology against them in order to create this power and dominion over the earth and all the things that live on it. So interesting way to open it, I found, right? But now we'll zoom back in a little bit more. I don't know if they continue, and we'll get into some of the nitty gritty here. All right. To the ancients, thunder and lightning were the most terrifying things, signifying the anger of the gods. If humanity is a conductor or coil between darkness and light, then what is free will? And this is so crucial in order to understand what freedom is, okay? What is free will? Well, it's the capacity to say yes or no to the current that is traveling through us, to the footsteps of the hierarchies over the human heart that one esoteric poet calls emotions. Emotions. It's in motion. Subvert or kill the free will in humans, and what do you have? Obstinance, perfect slavery, robots, robotoids who somehow have a habit of rising to the top, like Clinton, Kissinger, or the serial killer. Zbigniew Brzezinski, founder of the Trilateral Commission with Pierre Trudeau. Did anybody know that Pierre Elliott Trudeau co-founded the Trilateral Commission with the Rockefellers? And David Rockefeller outlines in his book, The Technotronic Era, he's talking about Brzezinski, the role of robotoids in the New World Order. He speaks of the masses as if they were some kind of inanimate object to be controlled and cloned by robotoids, people who act like people and who seem like people, but who are not people. Forms resembling human beings, but with no feeling, no thought, and who are capable of watching the vivisection of a human body or soul with no compassion, no remorse. Not Homo sapiens, but robotoid Darwin types, as the German scientist Dr. Kubark has defined them and devised an instrument that can tell them apart. Brzezinski writes, "Power will gravitate into the hands of those who control information. Our existing institutions will be supplanted by pre-crisis management situations, the task of which will be to identify in advance likely social crises and to develop programs to come with them." Just think of like Event 201 and the like, okay? This will encourage tendencies through the next several decades towards a technotronic era, a dictatorship. And this was Brzezinski's term for it, the technotronic era, a dictatorship, even less room for political procedures as we know them. Finally, looking ahead to the end of the century, we have the possibility of biochemical mind control and genetic tinkering with man, including beings which will function like them as well. Brzezinski's Technotronics, Dr. John Coleman concludes, would, without any system of political checks and balances, establish continuous surveillance over every citizen and institute. Such a system of mind control, human-like robots, and a system of terror which would make Felix Dzerzhinsky's Red Terror look like child's at play. Dr. Henry Kissinger introduces a new dimension to the robotoid. It is now well known that Kissinger, former Secretary of State for the United States of America, has been an agent of the Soviet Union since 1946. His code name was Bohr. And boy, has he seen the blood flow. In certain rituals, there is a direct correlation between the shedding of human blood and the acquisition of satanic energy. According to some of our contributors, most politicians are, strange though the statement may seem, robotoids, frontmen, plumbers, crew, engineers of the Committee of 300. Their ascent to the top having been facilitated so that they can help deliver their respective countries, its resources, and its people to the secret brotherhood of the Illuminati. Now think about it, guys. If we would have been reading this book not that long ago, many of you would just go, wow, this sounds like some kind of science fiction book. This is crazy wackadoodle conspiracy that treated robotoids. What's this? I got to point this out so we don't get confused by the terminology here, because some of this is a bit of tongue-in-cheek, okay? When they're saying robotoids, he's being specific. We're not just talking about how, okay, all of your politicians are secretly robots, like they were made in a lab, although we do joke about that and we sometimes wonder. But you got to think about this in terms of psychology. If you just want to keep it kind of down to earth and something that I think is a lot more plausible than some of the more X-Files-y versions of this, as fun as they are. The more plausible explanation is that you can notice this in yourself and you can notice it in others. Okay. Is that, and everybody's been talking about what we call NPCs, which is the video game acronym for non-playable characters. The characters you run into a video game that are not controlled by a human brain. They're programs. Okay. In the Matrix, they talk about programs, and that language, that computer language, was just starting to come online in the 90s when this book was written. And I think that what's happened in some senses is that that computerized language, as we make a metaphorical relationship with technology and the real world, is that sometimes there's a bit of cross-pollination between those two things. Okay. And then it gets a little bit too out of the box, but you can still find the core truths in what he's saying because he's talking psychologically. See, what they mastered in a lot of these mind control experiments, your MK Ultras, Project Often, the endless projects that we know, the CIA, Canadian Intelligence Services. By the way, MK Ultra, a lot of it was conducted in Montreal and in Quebec, by the way. And you have all these other programs, and other governments have done it. And this isn't anything new either. I track a lot of that research into basically the public mind, what makes a human tick. That's very, very ancient. Okay. That knowledge. With the advent of technology, they learned a hell of a lot more about human consciousness. And if you get Jim Keith's book on mind control, he breaks this all down as well. And you don't even need it to be that everybody's actually some robot or some lizard in a skin suit or any of this kind of stuff. Right? You can literally just look at this as, when you can program a consciousness through trauma or through any other, there's many other, I guess, doorways in, you can get a human being outside of their humanness. You can literally program the human mind. Okay. If you look at that consciousness as the light force or the electromagnetic energy or whatever it is that's powering us on, right? As something that's the brain and the body are a conduit for that circuitry, for that energy. Then how do you cut the biological being off from that electromagnetic energy or that source energy? Or it's all these kind of wacky names, but like you can get very scientific about this. How do you cut people off from that and turn the children of light into the children of darkness, which is just metaphor for people who are awake, alert, humane, they have empathy, they're creative, they desire freedom, just the average person, versus the people who seemingly want to work against the survival of their own species. They seem to be incredibly self-destructive and destructive to others and those around them. And they believe in violence as a way of solving problems. They are not in control of their minds or their emotions. So they're very chaotic and spontaneous, and that they can actually be highly suggestible. How do you create somebody that can become highly suggestible to the point where they no longer have any critical thinking power left? You know how we always critique everybody? Why is everybody so sheepish? Why are they so... How do they not see what's going on? Why do they keep voting for the NDP? Why do they keep voting for these members of this high table and actually allowing these agendas to happen? This has been the question I've had. Well, he's taken a crack at it here, and it's a pretty damn good one, where he's talking about how there's like occult, satanic level rituals that actually bring this effect on. And I've interviewed people have been abused in these networks. I've spoken to people from the inside. I've researched this for a while. And let me tell you, it's not as crazy conspiracy theory as you might think. It makes sense that when you're looking at this ancient lost knowledge, you're going to have the good, the bad, the ugly that comes with it. And a lot of knowledge has been accrued over the history of humanity as to how to create a perfect robotic order following slave. I don't think that this is really much of a stretch when we see these types of characteristics being exhibited by the vast majority of people out in the world. They either want to know nothing about it, or they're fine knowing about it, and now they're actually cheering on a very anti-human, anti-freedom, and very insidious agenda. And you got to wonder, how is that possible? Well, it's only possible if you can reprogram human consciousness, which was the agenda of this high table, because they knew the reason it had to be secret until now is because nobody would buy it. Nobody would want it. nobody that still has their soul, just to use that word, nobody that still has their conscience would go for it. No human being would go for the world that they want to create. And so they had to do this slowly. And they had to create a sort of orc army of android followers in order to do this. And they took control of the institutions. They took control of the media, the printing presses, not totally, but it's definitely there. And the universe, all these places we get our information from. And the programming has been going on over generations now. Okay. And so that's interesting. And so you got the trauma-based mind control thing. You've got the scientific mind control research programs, which are thoroughly documented, that were classified until they were unclassified at a certain point in history. And then you have the whole history of how this was done in ancient times. And when you put it all together, the people that have access to all this knowledge don't seem to be using that knowledge to help humanity and help the world. That's just the sales pitch. There seems to be something much darker going on, and they seem to have an endless supply of people that will help them bring this agenda into being. And you got to wonder, how did they achieve it? I think they did it through this programming process. And so I thought, wow, that's pretty dynamite. Let's get back to it. Oh, I got to get the right thing up here. Here we go. So, yeah, here we go. And when it comes to the secret brotherhood of the Illuminati, I mean, we've already talked about the actual historical documentation of the Illuminati. You can also look at that term. I don't even think they call themselves that. They looked at themselves as the illuminated ones, or the royals, or the vicars, or the ones in charge. They were a superior group, and whereas, the original term of Illuminati wasn't negative in a lot of this stuff. It was just the people who had achieved enlightenment through knowledge and all these different, there's like the enlightenment, like the sages, the wise sages. But that term obviously got co-opted by the bad guys who went, no, we are the enlightened ones. We got the prescription for the world. And then, we roll on into our current situation. So anyways, this goes into section 2, the New World Order in Canada, first principles. So let's get into this now. If you don't like all that occult stuff or esoteric stuff, don't worry about it. We're just going through some of these aspects, and we're going to get now very specific with Dr. John Coleman. So he's formerly British MI6, came out and blew the whistle. And he entitled this section of the book, Bronfman, Drugs, Canada, and the Illuminati, the Committee of 300. So he says this: the Committee of 300 is the body which is in complete control of preparations for the New World Order. It knows no national boundaries, is above the laws of all countries, and controls every aspect of politics, religion, commerce, industry, banking, insurance, mining, and even the drug trade. Seems like a big statement. And what he's really talking about there is that the steering committee level of all of these things he's mentioning have been co-opted. Okay, not everybody involved, just at the top decision-making level. He continues, it is an open conspiracy against God and man, to use the words of H.G. Wells, which includes enslaving the majority of humans left on this earth after wars, plagues, and mass murder. It subsumes all other conspiracies that go under various names, such as the Illuminati, Freemasonry, the Round Table, and the Milner Group. It seems to be able to impose its will upon any government without exception. It is the ultimate controlling body that runs the world and has done so for at least 100 years. The Club of Rome is still one of the most important foreign policy arms of the Committee of 300, the other being the Bilderbergers. It was put together in 1968 from hardcore members of the original Morgenthau group on the basis of a telephone call made by the late Aurelio Pecce for a new and urgent drive to speed up plans for the one world government, now called the New World Order. And of course, Aurelio Pecce was also one of the founding members of the Club of Rome, for anybody interested. The name New World Order, he says, is seen as something developed as a consequence of the Gulf War in 1991, whereas the one world government is recognized as being centuries old. The New World Order is not new. It has been around and developing under one name or another guise for a long time, but it is perceived as a development of the future. Development of the future. Could that be why they called it sustainable development, right? Which is not the case. The New World Order is past and present. And that is why I said earlier that the term one world government is or ought to be, continue here, preferred. There you go. That term, New World Order, should be preferred, he's saying. The Club of Rome is a conspiratorial umbrella organization, a marriage between Anglo-American financiers and the old black nobility families of Europe. Definitely something you got to look into, particularly the so-called nobility of London, Venice, and Genoa. The key to the successful control of the world is their ability to create and manage savage economic recessions and eventual depressions, as we are on the verge of here in Canada. The Committee of 300 looks to social convulsions on a global scale, followed by depressions, as a softening up technique for bigger things to come, as its principal method of creating masses of people all over the world who will become the welfare recipients of the future and who will be looked upon as being slightly above the level of cattle. So they're trying to create the environment in which they can create a psychological environment for the general public who will not fight back. That was the way they did it. So the economic recessions are a part of softening up the populace so that the next stage can come into being. And then now you're reliant on the very forces that caused your recession for your income and for your livelihood. You see how that works? The Club of Rome has its own private intelligence agency and also borrows from David Rockefeller's Interpol. Every U.S. intelligence agency cooperates very closely with it, as does the KGB and the Mossad. The only agency that remained beyond its reach was the East German intelligence service, the Stasi. You know, they had their own little game going on. Now, what are the goals of the secret elite group? This elite group also calls itself the Olympians. They truly believe they are equal in power and stature to the legendary gods of Olympus, who have, like Lucifer, their god, set themselves above our true God, and absolutely believe they have been charged with implementing the following by divine right. Now, he goes through like 48 of these. I just put the first two. You can go read his book, Committee of 300. But he says, basically, here's what it is: to establish a one world government, new world order, with a unified church, one religion to rule them all, and monetary system, one monetary system to rule them all under their direction. Not many people are aware that the one world government began setting up its church in the 1920s and 30s, for they realized that the religious belief inherent in mankind must have an outlet, and therefore set up a church body to channel this belief to the direction they desire. So he's talking about the deep church, the capturing of the religious institutions at the institutional level. And then 2, the agenda is to bring about the utter destruction of all national identity and national pride. How's that going in Canada, guys? It's happening blatantly every single day, which is of primary consideration if the concept of a one world government is to work. Okay. Now, I don't want to get into too many segues. We're just going to continue marching on here. This is by an anonymous writer, EC, who hails from London, Ontario. And he's talking about how what the New World Order is really about is murder. To the best of my knowledge, Maurice Strong is the only Canadian sitting on the Committee of 300 who is extremely powerful. Of course, there was Walter Gordon, who used to have his signature on our money, but he has now passed away. Trudeau and Desmarais are nothing and of no consequence whatsoever, just pawns. Last January, Strong held a secret dinner meeting in Washington, D.C. at the Foggy Bottom Cafe with none other than Robert McNamara. The key to Strong is his relationship with the Aspen Institute, which is a British intelligence front. Go check out the Aspen Institute, guys. It is important to grasp the big picture, he says. To the best of my knowledge, everyone, with the exception of a few, simply do not grasp what the New World Order is truly about. It is about murder, and murder on a massive scale. The other day, Leonard Cohen did an extensive interview in relation to his new book. And I think, guys, this is the 90s, all right? The commentator asked him to predict our near future. Cohen smiled and went to a passage that said, "Oh, the darkness, murder, murder, murder." The Committee of 300 decided many years ago, based on some kind of scientific evidence, that the planet would self-destruct. Hence, Kissinger and his committee formulated Plan 2000. Not only was the population growth to be discouraged, but the world had to be depopulated. A sustainable Earth, they were led to believe. Sustainable development. So they were led to believe. So a sustainable Earth, that's their term, as everybody's been led to believe, can only maintain 1 billion people. Remember that Bertrand Russell quote. And therefore, for their own survival, the curve of population has to be reversed. We are now witnessing a return to the Dark Ages. It is no mistake that the gay community has gained respect. These guys are coming from conservative Christian background, right? The family unit is discouraged. Marriage is out. Unemployment is the norm. Industrial growth is being destroyed. And the biological agent AIDS has been developed. They got a whole chapter on AIDS, by the way, against which the medical community is powerless. The treatment of virus disease falls outside of known medical capabilities. The young people of this world are being systematically murdered because the molecular structure of a condom will not hold back a virus. In order to see a virus, one needs an electron microscope at 50,000 times. It is like shooting a marble through a basketball hoop, which is why your masks didn't work at all. It is imperative in today's world to raise the level of awareness so that people can evaluate the illusion that is being created all around them. Their perception of things is being directed, controlled, and this systematic manipulation of thought has gone on for decades. Once people's minds have lapsed into a state of apathy or confusion with no apparent direction or hope, the battle is over. The country has been taken. I fear there is no fight left in the Canadian people. He's writing this back in 95, guys, okay? Look where we are now. In their apathy and confusion, they cannot seem to recognize the enemy. Yeah, that's my prime complaint. The fishermen in the Maritimes, for example, simply stood back and watched the planned destruction of the fishing industry, becoming victim of the force of the Antichrist. The weapons of mass destruction that have been devised for the population of Canada and the world make atomic warfare obsolete and have been hidden from the public domain for years. The AIDS virus, biological depopulation via injections, etc., the Gwen microwave grid system, mass mind control, cosmosphere particle beam weapons circling the Earth, which could make the village of Arthur disappear in a second. It's important to know the Cold War has never been over, but disinformation abounds. It is just another camouflage to prepare us for the final act. I am convinced that the script of this play was written thousands of years ago and that we are all actors upon a stage of life, that the issue is man's destruction of his fellow man in one form or another. Eventually the curtain will fall. There will be no applause, just silence. So he's not very rosy about it back then. But I bring up these sections because I'm just giving you guys, this is the history of the people trying to figure this out. That's what we're studying. So here we are in 2025 reading some of the old school guys, what they started to notice, what their concerns were, some of them valid, some of them exaggerated, but they were onto something. They were concerned and they were triggered by the fact that they noticed something that wasn't right going on in their society, even back then. And they started to investigate and they got a hold of the information that they could. And they started to try to expose it. And so that's why it's valuable. It's important to have the history of where all these ideas even came from, where this research even came from. And then we can suss out what was accurate, what wasn't, what was just some personal anecdotes, what was just valid research, right? So just keep that in mind as we go through these kind of books, that we're going through the historical record of basically the people that started to recognize that there really was a conspiracy afoot in the world, and they were doing their best to try to figure out what it was, where it started, who done it. And we're still trying to do that to this day. And I think today we have a lot better answers than they did back then, but without them, we wouldn't be here. And I just wanted to make sure that that was made clear. Now, this next one is from writer J.L. Reid Washington, called New World Order Strategy to Control Population, Mind Control. This one's important. He says this: the idea of mind control conjures up many different impressions. Mind control can be as overt as drug-induced behavioral modification or as subtle as subliminal suggestion below the level of awareness. Most people would never suspect that they may be the object of mind control, particularly from those in control of the government. Most people are certain that they are independent thinkers and that all the conclusions they have drawn about themselves and their perception of the world are of their own making. Aldous Huxley stated in 1959, quote, "It seems to me perfectly in the cards that there will be within the next generation or so a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude and producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies, so that people will in fact have their liberties taken away from them, but will rather enjoy it because they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda, brainwashing, or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods." And now you can see why the research project that I did called Cult of the Medics is so relevant to all of this, because who would be in charge of creating and unleashing the pharmacological methods of mass control, right? If that was indeed the agenda. So I found that to be pretty interesting. And of course, when you say mind control, that's like that's the term that nobody wants to go with. You know, it's better to say, oh, it's mass hysteria, mass formation psychosis. Sounds a little more scientific, but really you could just say mind control. Somebody is externally controlling your mind, and you believe you are in control of your mind when most of your ideas, belief systems, and premises in your mind have been installed for you by, guess who? A whole bunch of different people that have influenced your mind. And some of it can be positive influence and some of it can be negative. And it's just really interesting to me that everybody walks around with the assumption that all of those influences on their mind at a subconscious level are purely positive, because no one would want to admit that they let somebody in through the gates of their mind, and no one would want to admit that they were wrong in their perceptions. It's a natural thing. And of course, those who've designed these programs are fully aware of the human ego and how it works, all the defense mechanisms, and that's all been put into the calculation before rolling out this whole propaganda agenda. So this is all just helping to explain why we've got android people walking around. We've got people that don't think for themselves. They don't think critically. They seem to be devoid of empathy. We're seeing the shocking rise in some of the most horrific, brutal, violent attacks on the streets in Canada. People are breaking into people's homes and doing the most grotesque, evil things to people. That it's beyond the imagination of the average Canadian that they would ever even see these things. And so what do the average Canadians do? They pretend they didn't see it. They try to justify it. They try to walk away from it. They just shake their head and walk away when you try to talk about it. And that is something that is sadly working against our own best interests, because we can't ignore what's happening and we got to start paying attention to it. So behavior modification, mind control, all of that, perception management, super important to understand. The human brain operates like a receiver, is basically a receiver, and it receives frequencies in the electromagnetic spectrum, as well as those that popular science has ignored that are outside of the electromagnetic spectrum. It is these frequencies beyond the electromagnetic spectrum that are almost impossible to detect. By projecting these frequencies to the brain, one can be put into a beta, alpha, theta, or delta state of consciousness according to the frequency modulation. Another method of behavior modification is the use of subliminal suggestions. And I think this is all you need, really. You don't need electrodes in people's brains. It really could just be this. Another method is subliminal suggestions. Subliminal suggestions are received by the subconscious, the truly potent director of our behavior, at the level below conscious awareness. Subliminal suggestion is used extensively in advertising to get people to respond to the recommendations of the selling agent. Without special equipment, subliminal messages are also impossible to detect. Last but not least is behavior modification via the education system, the free public education system particularly. Young children are acutely suggestible. If you tell them that reality is constructed in a certain way, they will generally believe it. If you further punish them through peer pressure or other means of deprivation for not behaving according to a particular version of reality, you can enforce compliance to your standards. It's called pain compliance. This paper is concerned with how all of these methods have been and are being used to keep the North American public under control, I believe is how he finished that statement. I lost a slide there. So before we get into the next section by Tex Mars, he contributed back then to this book. Just think about this, okay? And I did cover this also in Cult of the Medics in a few sections about how mass control, because we watched it happen in real time in a very recent example and are still watching it happen on numerous fronts. And now they have social media as a weapon. Okay. It doesn't mean social media is all evil. Like here we are on social media right now, using it for good purposes, I hope. But it can absolutely be a vehicle towards creating subliminal messaging, right? And drawing people in to conclusions that they think they made themselves that just so happen to feed into the agenda of the person who installed the conclusions. And then you're going to have to be able to look at it and go, was it a positive or a negative thing? Am I the thinker of my own thoughts? Am I the person who really writes my own story? Am I the author, the authority over my own mind? Or is somebody else writing my own script for me? Am I a puppet on a string? These are the questions you need to ask, right? So that's got to be one of the most important aspects if you're going to create, especially by illegal and conspiratorial and seditious means, the overthrowing of a country. And you can't just walk in and overthrow a country, or the countrymen are just going to overthrow you. So you've got to find a way to get them to march alongside you, or at least get the vast majority of people either just not doing anything to fight back. That's just as powerful as the people that are promoting it, by the way. And of course, the people that are promoting it. You got to have all those angles covered. And so what we're looking at here is the people who researched the original paperwork and designs of a lot of these different agendas. And they're just trying to share with the public, hey, they wrote this down, that this was possible to achieve, and that they should be using it to help bring about the New World Order. And all we have to ask is, do you think they maybe use that knowledge and actually put it into practice? And then when you look around at our current state of affairs, I don't think it's a far stretch to conclude that, yeah, they did. They didn't just do all of those mind control experiments and subliminal messaging experiments to try to just for fun. I mean, they did it for a purpose, right? And look at the state of the vast majority of the public. Look at the minds coming out of our universities today. Just big, it's not what it used to be at all. And look at what everybody's clapping and cheering for, thinking that it's their own opinion and their own way of seeing the world, and that they're on the side of right. They're on the right side of history, while they're voting away their entire security, their country, their freedom, and eventually their lives when this gets down to the end of it. And how do you get people to walk into such a trap? Well, you got to know how to do mind control on the subliminal level. Oh, sorry, we jumped back into the video there. Okay, so let me go back in here. Let's continue. So much more. Oh, I missed that one. Let's go back one. All right. Now, this one's from Tex Mars. He was formerly of the United States Air Force and University of Texas. He calls this section Periscope of the Illuminati in Canada, Maurice Strong. So we're back to Maurice Strong again. And here we go. He says this. Most of the world was first introduced to Maurice Strong in 1992, while he was serving as Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, the so-called Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro. Before, during, and after the summit, the Canadian activist made headlines more than once with environmental tirades against the lifestyle of the rich countries, the fact that he was the top executive of the privately owned Dome Petroleum of Canada, president of Power Corporation of Canada, it's literally called Power Corporation, and later head of Petro-Canada, the giant government oil company, is fairly well known from many profiles about him appearing in the major media. And of course, it's pretty rich that someone like him is the one talking about how we have to get rid of all the powerful countries. Many of these articles mention that he was head of the 1972 United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm, and the first Secretary General of the United Nations Environmental Program, UNE. We were able, however, to uncover any articles even suggesting the range of Strong's insider connections. Yet this man is president of the World Federation of United Nations Associations, co-chairman of the World Economic Forum. There you go. Member of the Club of Rome. I mean, he's pretty high up. Trustee of the Aspen Institute. There it is again. A director of the World Future Society. The World Future Society. Director of Finance of the Lindisfarne Association. A founding endorser of Planetary Citizens. Convener of the Fourth World Wilderness Congress. Organizer of the International Business Council for Sustainable Development. And builder of the Valley of the Refugee of World Truths, a spiritual center on his controversial Baca Grande Ranch in Colorado. So he's up there with all the top cheese guys. The idea for the venture at the Baca, his ranch, took root in 1978 when a mysterious man visited Han bearing a prophecy of the coming apocalypse. The dream grew amid omens that defy belief. It has been nourished by Strong's friends, such people as Rockefeller, former Canadian Premier Trudeau, the Dalai Lama, and Shirley MacLaine. Another of the Strong's friends, Najim Halabi, CFR, former chairman of Pan American and father of the Queen of Jordan, has built an Islamic zukkarat at the Baka. So there's your Islamo-communist connection. The first groups to join the Strongs in setting up operations at the desert site were the Aspen Institute and the Lindensfarne Association. William F. Jasper, Global Tyranny, Step by Step. And this is a book that was written in 1993. So that's where he's quoting from. So I found some of those points incredibly interesting because I've discovered them in my own researches. Maurice Strong is quite the character to get into. So Maurice Strong and the Secret Brotherhood. This is from Tex Mars. Is there behind the scenes an Illuminati, a secret clique of wealthy men and women, masterminding a massive conspiracy to rule the world? As unlikely as it may seem, the astonishing answer is yes. There is a secret organization of illuminized men that exists. It is the money power of America, Europe, and Asia. I call the men who lead it the Secret Brotherhood. The members of this clandestine group believe themselves to be men of a superior race and bloodline. They are convinced that their destiny is to be served. We are to become their economic slaves. Over the centuries, these diabolical men, agents of a magical underworld known to only a few, have banded together in secret societies, amassing untold wealth and material treasures. But because greed is never satisfied, their hungry appetite for more and more money and for more and more absolute unchallenged power grows daily. And guys, they're not in this for the money. This is about power. Money is just a means to an end. The calculating, shrewd men of the Secret Brotherhood have convinced themselves that they know what is best for mankind. They believe also that their natural superiority over the rest of us gives them the right to conceal and cloak their true intentions. Once you read this article, you will know for a certainty, if you don't already know it, that there is a world conspiracy by a hidden elite. You will just know it, period. All the evidence is there, mountains of evidence. No other conclusion is possible. A world conspiracy that deeply and severely affects you and me exists. It is for real. It may be too late for us to stop the men of the Secret Brotherhood, but I am not yet ready to concede defeat. I know this. It is not too late to warn as many men and women as we can about the miserable fate that the hidden elite have in store for them. It is not too late to protect as many innocent people as we can from the savage destiny that otherwise awaits them. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the courageous Russian dissident writer exiled by communist tyrants for standing up to their cowardly atrocities, once wrote, "The simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. One word of truth outweighs the world." Boom, that's one of my favorites. To attain its objectives, the men who lead the Secret Brotherhood have promulgated 3 key directives. The prime directive of the Secret Brotherhood is this: that the glory of the one shall be paramount. Unity out of diversity must be achieved in every arena of life, in every avenue of human endeavor. As the inscription on the US $1 bill signifies in Latin, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. And they're talking about not just, can I say something real quick about this? Out of many, one. I've been talking, I got to keep bringing it up. I've been talking for a while about how there's basically been a hijacking and a pirating of the ancient wisdom given to humanity by previous generations of humanity who dedicated their entire lives to accruing and collecting that knowledge and wisdom. And that archive of knowledge and wisdom about nature, about consciousness, about building civilization, about the argument about freedom and free will and all these different things, that archive was basically raided by pirates. And then many of the elements were used as a way of building a power structure, as opposed to what it was originally intended for by the ancient wisdom keepers and defenders of truth, which was to make it about how does it impact your life. So when you see e pluribus unum, right, the idea that out of many, one, that is actually supposed to be in its original talking about how you become individuated as the divine individual, how you wake up and become fully conscious of your potential and who you are and your connection to God, the universe, nature, and all these different things, right? This is an individual thing when it comes to the original meaning of it. But out of many, so basically you're separating yourself from the crowd of people who just follow all the propaganda and all the stuff. You're now becoming individuated. That's a sacred process that I'm very much an advocate for. But when you go, well, let's take that statement and talk about nations and how we create one world ring of power to rule them all. It now has a totally different meaning, doesn't it? Out of many, one, right? Out of many nations, cultures, right? All the diversity of humanity, we're going to make one big hive mind ruled by a tiny unelected elite. Now it has a totally different meaning. So this is just one example, because I've been saying this a lot, that what they're using, it's not the knowledge itself that's evil. It's that they found true sacred knowledge and corrupted it, warped it, and are trying to sell it back to us for the purpose of luring us in to granting them power, as opposed to the original meaning, which was to find a way to grant that power as an individual, right? And truly achieve freedom. So there's two ways of looking at that, as we're going to see with much of this stuff. The second related directive of the Secret Brotherhood and its affiliated secret societies and organizations is that the hierarchy of the Secret Brotherhood shall control the one. Yeah, there you go. The few, the elite, the Illuminati, shall reign over many. So he's in agreement with my assessment there. The conspirators of the Secret Brotherhood, the Illuminati, today have few rivals to preclude their achieving their goals of global conquest by the year 2000. They were thinking this was all going to come in 2000. And you know what's funny? You know what's kind of funny about that? I remember the year 2000. I was born in 1982. I remember all the humdrum about all the computers or all the ones and zeros because we didn't date anything 2000 plus. All the computers are going to crash. The economy is going to crash. Right. Well, I remember that whole thing. And when I really look back at key moments where things changed in the world, there's some pretty good demarcations, right? You got like the year 2000, obviously 2001 happened right after it, right? Which changed everything in the West with 9/11. And then you had the next big one, which would probably be 2008, the economic crash. And then you had the next big one, which was 2012, which was all the thing about the Mayan calendar or whatever. And then 2020, next one is 2030, right? There seems to be these like junction points that who knows how they're all connected, but they definitely trigger great change. And, these guys are very much watching how the configuration of the planets and the orientation of the sun and how that all relates to human consciousness and the development of life on Earth. They've been watching this stuff for eons of time, and they've been using it to plan the opening of new parliaments. There's sort of a ritual component that has to do with that higher time, right? So you wonder if there's certain energy points, like energy building points or momentum points. That's what I'm talking about. There's certain momentum building points in our history that there's a natural thing that's happening in the unfolding process of our existence as humans on the planet related to our time here, right? It's all relative, I guess. There's sort of a natural thing that changes and upgrades and adjusts this energy that we're all expressing, that we call the soul, and how it's connected to everything else that's going on in the universe, right? There's sort of a natural wave of momentum that's going on that is these guys are sort of surfing on and banking on to hit certain targets, right? And so when these guys were seeing all these things coming in, these authors that I'm talking about, and they're looking at this in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and they're seeing the build. And they're also using the year 2000, not because that's their theory. They're using the year 2000 because that's what was written down in a lot of these documents about what the agendas were by these Club of Rome's and these World Economic Forums and how they want it. You can even see the trend in Hollywood, right? About at this stage of the game, this is where we want to be. And at this stage down the road, this is where we want to be, right? So I just want to point that out for anybody that would go, well, the New World Order didn't happen in the year 2000. I'd be like, yeah, but the world drastically changed in the year 2000 moving forward. Okay. Massive explosion in technology, unlike we'd ever seen before. Again, you bring it back to 9/11, which sort of, as the momentum was building, boom, gets shot down. And now you've got trauma-based mind control operations happening where, real events are converging in the world, but then they're used and they're shown to you 24 hours a day. And then other events follow them. Right. And then on and on we go. So I'm just kind of bringing this idea of this manipulation of time into this, if we're dealing with a bunch of dark magicians here, because they would be definitely into it. And then what these guys are just noticing is the trends of that, and then going, hey, is this all going to kick off in the year 2000? Is this going to be 2011? Is it going to be 2012? And I think things have drastically changed in these different timelines, right? Like even after 2012, it seems like after 2012, there was a lot of things that just shifted the culture, shifted the world. That's when shortly thereafter, you had the massive push for so many of these different things that have drastically impacted our economies and our way of life. And so I don't know, there's something to the dates that I think they're just starting to look at here when they're writing this book. Just wanted to point that out. You guys let me know what you think. In addition, in decades past, the secret societies themselves warred against one another. This is huge, each vying for control and absolute power. Today, however, the leaders of the secret societies have all come together as one. They have found that the greater rewards are possible only if unity is practiced in purpose and in organization. Astonishingly, he says, my investigation has revealed that almost all the world's secret societies, banking and financial institutions, crime syndicates, intelligence agencies, and occult groups have merged. All now come under the direct command and authority of the elite executive council of the Secret Brotherhood, and never before in the annals of human history has so much power been deposited in the hands of so few. The first thing to be done is to unmask the plot of the Secret Brotherhood and shed some much needed light on their dangerous, often disguised activities. A perfect way to start is to focus our eyes and minds in the direction of a very wealthy man who currently wields tremendous power within the highest ranks of those who intend to rule the world. Let me then again introduce you to Mr. Maurice Strong, fervent New Ager, wealthy aristocrat, dedicated environmentalist, and a man with access to the inner circles of the Secret Brotherhood. He lives in beautiful Baca Grande area of the St. Louis Valley in Colorado. He is one of the most wealthy and most staggeringly powerful men on the face of the earth, as he's writing in the 90s there. He counts among his closest friends such billionaires as David Rockefeller and Lord Rothschild, as well as Pope John Paul II. In 1992, as chairman of the United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, he visited with President George Bush in the White House and gave the president a personal invitation to the Gala Affair, said to be the premier environmental event of the 21st century. And that's where all the climatistas were born. If there is any one man who sits at the top echelon of authority in formulating the plan for the New World Order, it is Maurice Strong, the Canadian financier and investor. In 1990, Maurice Strong gave a fascinating series of interviews to Daniel Wood, a writer for Canada's West magazine. Wood spent considerable time with Strong, and on one particularly stunning occasion, Maurice Strong loosened up and let his guard down for a very few revealing moments. Here is how writer Daniel Wood describes a ride and conversation with Maurice Strong when visiting the ruggedly attractive Baca Grande Ranch. So this is from writer Daniel Wood. He says, I leave the Baca with Strong, retracing our route a week earlier. We passed the Lazy U Ranch and turned south on Highway 17. Strong tells me he has often wished he could write. He has a novel he'd like to do. It's something he's been thinking about for a decade. It would be a cautionary tale about the future. Each year, he explains, as background to the telling of the novel's plot, the World Economic Forum convenes in Davos, Switzerland. Over 1,000 CEOs, prime ministers, and leading academics gather in February to attend meetings and set economic agendas for the year ahead. With this as a setting, he then says, what if a small group of these world leaders were to form a secret society to bring about an economic collapse? It's February. They're all at Davos. These aren't terrorists. They're world leaders. They have positioned themselves in the world's commodity and stock markets. They've engineered a panic using their access to stock exchanges and computers and gold supplies. They jam the gears. They hire mercenaries who hold the rest of the world leaders at Davos as hostages. The markets can't close. The rich countries, and Strong makes a slight motion with his fingers as if he were flicking a cigarette butt out the window. I sat there spellbounded. This is not any storyteller talking. This is Maurice Strong. He knows these world leaders. He is, in fact, co-chairman of the Council of the World Economic Forum. He sits at the fulcrum of power. He is in a position to do it. I probably shouldn't be saying things like this, he says to me. And this was published in West Magazine, May of 1990. So, little anecdotal story there of someone taking a ride with Maurice Strong back in the day. So Tex Mars continues here. Unlike most of his peers in the Illuminati fraternity, who rarely display their anger or emotion in public, Strong is well known for openly expressing his dreams and frustrations. Obviously, this man is a true believer. He wants world government and centralized authority now, and he's ready to do whatever it takes to hasten the process. The Brotherhood has long been content to subvert and conquer its opposition bit by bit and piece by piece. It has shrewdly stayed behind the scenes in the calculated hope that by its stealth and by the covert nature of its operations, potential opposition would not become suspicious, nor would enemies to its sinister goals be provoked and aroused. The Secret Brotherhood's long-range strategy has proven itself again and again. Still, while Maurice Strong's threat of a global coup d'etat is not entirely unrealistic, the scenario he paints so vividly of a group of powerful, super-rich conspirators who meet each year to plan the world's economic and political future, deciding to go for the jugular, could just happen. This conspiratorial group does exist, and its eventual aims are indeed exactly as Strong depicts. Their goal is to accumulate most all of this planet's wealth and power under their wings. They intend to become our masters, our benefactors, and our gods. And then at the end of this, I just left it there because it's the next section. And guys, it's a super long chapter. I'll have to look at this for a future one, but it's interesting. The link between Hindu cults and world leaders. This will be an interesting one. We'll get into that down the road. I definitely could tell you about like the cults in general, but the Hindu cults, that's interesting to me. Okay. Now here we are with Professor Robert O'Driscoll, who is the main guy writing this book. He's got his little chapter here, and his section gets into another Canadian that people need to know about. His name is Paul Desmarais and the Trilateral Commission, or The Prime Minister Has No Clothes, by Professor Robert O'Driscoll. So here we go. The Puppet Master. In the Halloween edition of the Toronto Star, 1993, Judy Steed published a rather brilliant analysis of the backroom cabal who once more won control of the government of the Canadian people. So guys, they've been winning the control of the government of the Canadian people for quite some time. She was the Conservatives' shining star. He was the wily coyote, or she was the wily coyote who'd weathered too many storms. Then Jean Chrétien hit the campaign trail, selling the team, the platform, the policies. And Prime Minister Kim Campbell became a footnote in history. Miss Steed turns her attention then to Chrétien's campaign manager, John Ray, and interestingly to his father, Saul Ray. A man sits quietly in the lobby of the Royal York Hotel. Amid garish decor and gaggles of tourists, John Ray blends into the woodwork, a fair-haired fellow wearing a tweed jacket and a bland expression. Not many people outside tightly knit circles in Ottawa and Montreal recognize Ray, 48 years old and executive vice president of Power Corp. There it is again. Right-hand man to Paul Desmarais, protege of Jean Chrétien, older brother of Bob, and supreme commander of the Liberal election campaign. Asked why he selected Ray to run the show, Chrétien said simply, "He's very smart and I trust him." Ray's father, Saul, was a child vaudeville star who sang and danced with the Little Rays of Sunshine. Bobby inherited the talent, John says with a shy grin. He chose to work behind the scenes, a stage manager with the ability to terrify the troops if they didn't perform to his standards. He has a special connection to his leading man. Now, John Ray was a 21-year-old political science student at Queen's University when he first encountered Chrétien in Geneva, which is in Switzerland. It was 1966. Saul was Canada's ambassador to the United Nations. Chrétien, traveling in official government business, spotted young John as a bright kid. A year later, Ray became Chrétien's assistant in Indian and Northern Affairs and stayed with the minister for 4 years before moving on to Power Corp. Power Corp. He was introduced to Desmarais, the patriarch of the Power Corp, by Chrétien. Mr. Chrétien is a man of great qualities, Ray says. He has always been underestimated. Very subtly and skillfully, Miss Steed then turns her analysis to another principal, Paul Martin. Remember that guy? Now federal minister of finance, or at least at the time this was written. The Confederation dinner, a major liberal fundraiser in Toronto, was packed with party movers and shakers, but Ray stayed away. He leaves the limelight to others. Paul Martin was there, though, fresh from a day on the hustings in southwestern Ontario, spreading his message: the role of government is to help build a modern, innovation-driven entrepreneurial culture. It is to Chrétien's credit that Martin has been upfront throughout, not having to worry about knives in the back like Joe Clark did after losing the Conservative leadership to Brian Mulroney. Remember the guy that gave us GST? A wealthy Montreal-based business executive, Martin, like Ray, rose through the ranks at Power Corp, mentioned by Desmarais, from whom he eventually bought Canada Steamship Lines. First elected in 1988, Martin lost the leadership to Chrétien after Turner departed, but was drawn into the heart of the party by Chrétien's principal secretary. Martin was responsible for shaping the Aylmer Conference, a pivotal event in contemporary liberal history. It was held 2 years ago in Aylmer, Quebec, across the river from the nation's capital. And just to let everybody know, Paul Martin followed as sort of like an interim prime minister after Chrétien. So he got in anyways. In his Straight from the Heart in 1985, the present Prime Minister of Canada outlines his deep connection with the chairman of Power Corporation. My dad, he said, lived to be 93. He would have been pleased when my daughter, France, became a lawyer and married André Desmarais, the son of Paul Desmarais, chairman of Power Corporation. It owns Consolidated Bathurst, the paper company for which my father had worked all his life. He used to say, I never thought I'd see the day when a French Canadian would own that mill. Thus we have, and this is where the story comes together, thus we have three of the most powerful positions in the Canadian government: the Minister for Finance, the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister's right-hand man, inextricably linked with one corporation and one man, its longtime chairman, Paul Desmarais. So is the present Premier of Quebec, Daniel Johnson. He also came up through the ranks of Power Corp. The story, however, does not stop there, as we realize when we look at the recent maneuverings of the Conservative, who was until a few months ago Prime Minister of Canada. Witness the recent Southam release, November of 1993. And here it is. Brian Mulroney has discovered life after politics, and it's already proving to be richly rewarding. The former prime minister is in China this week as a lawyer and lobbyist for Montreal-based Power Corporation of Canada, while it begins assembling plans to, wait for it, invest in Chinese energy projects and explore other business opportunities. So when you see Carney doing all these deals with China right now, he's kind of just continuing where the other Fabian socialists left off well before him. The release, Mulroney lobbying in China, goes on to say that Power Corp has joined forces with North America's two largest public utilities, Ontario Hydro and Hydro-Quebec, to help China develop its energy potential. Their joint venture, Asia Power Corp Incorporated, will be owned equally by three Canadian corporate giants involved and will operate from Hong Kong. Power Corp's legal interests throughout the Asia-Pacific region are expected to be overseen by a Hong Kong branch office at Ogilvy Renault, the Montreal law firm at which Mulroney is a senior partner. So he's continuing here. This links both the Conservative and Liberal Party to Paul Desmarais. And indeed, Mel Herding writes, Since Brian Mulroney became prime minister, big business has had effective control of the political and economic agenda, and hence the social and cultural agenda as well. Paul Desmarais provided much of the money for Pierre Trudeau's campaign, Brian Mulroney's campaign, and Jean Chrétien's campaign. And that's from a book called The Betrayal of Canada, another one you guys should get. Desmarais collects politicians, Robert Fife writes in the Toronto Sun back in December of 1993, like he accumulates companies. So he collects politicians the way he accumulates companies, kind of like the Rockefellers and all those guys. He was close friends with Pierre Trudeau and recently hired Mulroney as Power Corp lawyer and took the former prime minister with him on a recent trip to China. The links with the NDP is also there through John Ray, brother to Bob, Premier of Ontario, who a couple years ago appointed Maurice Strong chairman of Ontario Hydro. This is one big happy family. Doesn't matter what political side you're on. And he took him on in his first task. The chopping of 4,500 jobs at Ontario Hydro is now joining Power Corporation to invest millions in energy in China. So I love all the people that come out and go, China, look at China has achieved with their communist dictatorship. I mean, they're rivaling all the super capitalist countries of the world. It's like, yeah, they were sponsored by the capitalist countries. All the corporations, through a combination of the corporate enterprise and the fiefdom of taxpayer money, is what built China. And now they get to pretend they're still communists when they're powered by these crony capitalists, which is not to be conflated with true free market capitalism, which is not what they're using either in Canada or China. So everybody can chill on that old tired argument. So here we go. Ontario Hydro, Hydro-Quebec, and Power Corp have formed a joint venture with $100 million to invest in power plants in China and elsewhere in Asia. This is one of the most rapidly expanding markets in the world. Ontario Hydro Chairman Maurice Strong said in a conference telephone call from Beijing yesterday, China needs a lot of electric power. The name of that consolidated venture will operate under its Asia Power Group. Asia Power Group. And they will invest, get this, into small coal-fired plants being built in the south of China. The Asia Power Group, we are told, are also looking at larger power projects in northern China, as well as in Malaysia, the Philippines, and India. The Asian economies are expected to spend at least $1 trillion on power plants, airports, roads, phone systems, ports, and other forms of infrastructure over the next decade. Spending on power generation alone is expected to reach 400 billion US. And that's estimated by the Toronto Star in November 93. Profits are linked to the cost of labor. And with Mexico now providing the cheap labor of North America, Canadian industrialists are looking further afield for even cheaper labor. There is, as Peter Godspeed from the Asian Bureau of the Toronto Star back in 93 writes, a seamy side to China's economic miracle, meaning it was all a big staged hoax. The wages are appallingly low and the safety standards are lax. And then they just break up what it was like to get paid $45 a month, working 12 hours a day, 6, sometimes 7 days a week. And they got thousands of these Hong Kong-owned factories employing nearly 3 million workers to basically build this project. So there you go. It keeps going. I'm just kind of jumping through sections here to give you a few highlights, but just wanted to show the connection between the Desmarais, all the political parties, the capturing of the corporate industry by these people, and the fact that they basically help build the China that we know today, right? Because don't forget, Pierre Elliott Trudeau actually went and visited Mao Zedong in China and was a fan of all of the communist dictators. This is how the whole Castro thing was even started, when he went to go visit Castro, and everybody thinks maybe his wife might have had a little stint, and that might have been how we got Justin Trudeau. But hey, that's just another conspiracy theory for you guys. You never know. Seems interesting when you look at the pictures, but either way, they're all ideologically aligned here, or they're at least they're using these communist factions and elements towards something bigger, because of course it just keeps going up that compartmentalized structure, right? But yeah, Paul Desmarais, massive, the Desmarais family, massive, the Bronfmans, the Desmarais, huge when it comes to Canadian history here. Paul Desmarais has been circumspect about joining the obvious New World Order organizations, but in September 1993, when it was clear that his protege Jean Chrétien would become the next Prime Minister of Canada, he did join the Trilateral Commission. Why? And what is the Trilateral Commission? Well, the Trilateral Commission was formed in 1973 by David Rockefeller. But in this situation, the banker seems to be the front man with the eminences debout in the background, two rather well-placed individuals, Pierre Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, and, wait for it, Zbigniew Brzezinski, later to be presidential advisor on national security. And of course, I also identified Zbigniew Brzezinski as being one of the chief guys in the Polish, I think it's Polish, cult, what is it? Knights of Malta. He's a Knight of Malta. You can go to the website. I showed it in Cult of the Medics. So it's all connected in the rings within rings. So Desmarais and the Trilateral Commission. Now, Trudeau's part. So this is Pierre Trudeau. Trudeau's part is shadowy, difficult to document. But Brzezinski's position is clear from his book, Between Two Ages in 1970, which was to impress Rockefeller so much. The book portentously claims that mankind has been moving through 4 great stages of evolution. Now listen to this, guys, okay? So this is, again, from the horse's mouth about how they see the trajectory of history and what the solutions are going to be, right? So the 4 great stages of evolution, and that we now find ourselves in the middle of the 4th and final stage. Sorry, did you say the 4th and final stage? Any idea where Klaus Schwab got his idea for naming this the 4th Industrial Revolution? Could it have any connection to some of his predecessors here? The world, therefore, needs, Brzezinski concludes, to weave a new fabric of international relations, which has always been the agenda, right? And there could be just really quickly, you could have, it's an interesting argument to put out in the public, and they get away with it because, yeah, you could say, yeah, there has to be some changes. There's got to be some little changes going on. But these guys don't want some little changes to make your life better, right? This is for power. The changes they want are the changes that are to change Western civilization into the New World Order. So just remember, that's always the objective, always masked with, well, we're trying to improve things and solve problems. And that's why we got to have these changes. We got the threat of global warming over here and climate change. We've got overpopulation over here. We got all these useless eaters over here. We've got AIDS and disease spreading wildly over here. And so we got to fix the problem, right? The problems we've helped create or even create artificially in your mind. And then it just so happens to lead to where they want to take us. So yeah, there's 4 stages, all right. So here it is. In Brzezinski's assessment of history, the first primitive stage revolves around religion, which provides for the acceptance of the idea that man's destiny is essentially in God's hands. Such a primitive idea, according to Brzezinski, of course, totally unacceptable. It demonstrates, he pontificates, a narrowness derived from massive ignorance, illiteracy, and a vision confined to the immediate environment. The second stage along the road to true enlightenment, Brzezinski posits, is nationalism, which marks another giant step in the progress redefinition of man's nature and place in the world. The third stage is Marxism, which represents a further vital and creative stage in the maturing of man's universal vision. Marxism, Brzezinski tells his readers, simultaneously a victory of the external, active man over the inner passive man, and a victory of reason over belief. According to them, it stresses man's capacity to share his material destiny and has served to stir the mind and to mobilize human energies purposely. The 4th and concluding stage is what Brzezinski describes as the technotronic era, or the ideal of rational humanism on an international scale with robots. It is more directly linked to the impact of technology and involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled and directed society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, of course, unrestrained by the restraints of traditional values. This elite would not hesitate to achieve its personal ends by using the latest modern techniques for influencing public opinion and keeping society under close surveillance and control. It will be possible, Brzezinski concludes, to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen and to maintain up-to-date complete files containing even personal information about the health or personal behavior of the citizen, in addition to more customary data. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authority. So, of course, he had a crystal ball, right? He was predicting where we're in right now. We can note that Brzezinski does not mention an authority, but the authority. And I find this is also really important. When you read these guys, you see they kind of give it away. Their own subconscious knowledge of what's going on here can bleed through. And when they don't say the authority, meaning, oh, the elected authority of the day. Sometimes we elect these guys. Sometimes we elect these guys. We have a free society. No, the authority, the ring of power, the high table. In his second book, The Technotronic Era, commissioned by the Club of Rome, Brzezinski expands on some of those points. He speaks of the masses as if people were some kind of inanimate object, of the necessity of controlling the masses, of cloning, of robotoids, i.e. people who act like people and who seem to be people, but who are not. There is one rather revealing passage. He says, power will gravitate into the hand of those who control information. You know why we've been calling this an information war? Because they call it an information war. Our existing institutions will be supplanted by pre-crisis management institutions, the task of which will be to identify in advance likely social crises and to develop programs to come with them. This will encourage tendencies through the next several decades towards a technotronic era, a dictatorship. This is directly from Brzezinski, leaving even less room for political procedures as we know them. Finally, looking ahead to the end of the century, the possibility of biochemical mind control and genetic tinkering with man, including beings which will function like them as well, could give rise to some difficult questions. And this was as quoted by John Coleman in his book, The Committee of 300. Here we have Brzezinski's technotronics, the establishment of a capacity to control each and every person through means of a type of mind control, which would create human-like robots, and a system of terror, which would make, and we already read this, blah, blah, blah. As well as this, it shall be decided who shall live and who shall be eliminated as a useless eater, where we shall worship and what we must wear, and even what we shall eat. According to Brzezinski, we shall be under surveillance around the clock, 365 days a year ad infinitum. Now just look at the world they're creating and what they're proposing, and look at how quickly they proposed it the minute the world was locked down under the pandemic. It was like, okay, guys, we're moving on from just pandemic. We want a new normal, and we want it to be permanent. Now, even though we all thought they meant new normal specifically just due to a temporary lockdown policy system that was brought in by the medics, what we really see now in retrospect is that no, the new normal was just another word for the New World Order. And in order to establish the New World Order, where you're governed by this tiny elite roundtable in the technotronic era, you need to have everybody normalized. And that's when I caught wind of remembering, right, wasn't that Yuri Bezmenov formula, the 4 stages of like demoralization, destabilization, introduce a crisis, manage the crisis, and then introduce a new normal, or he called it normalization. Well, there you go. It's all part of the same thing. Now he goes on. One can see, therefore, why it was expedient and necessary for Desmarais to join the Trilateral Commission before his foray into China. Everything was already in place, and especially the prime minister of the country he was operating from. Other Canadian members of the Trilateral Commission are, and here's a bunch of names, Gerald K. Bowie, former governor of the Bank of Canada, Conrad Black, chairman of Argus, John D. Allen, chief executive officer of Stelco, Raymond Cyr, president of Bell Canada Enterprises in Montreal, Peter Doble, Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Ottawa, Marie-Josée Drouin, Hudson Institute of Canada in Montreal, Claude A. Edwards, Public Service Staff Relations Board, Ottawa, Alan Gottlieb, former Canadian ambassador to the United States, David Henninger, Atlantic Regional Director, Burns Fry Limited in Halifax, Duff Roblin, Canadian Senate, Ron Sutherland, Chief Executive Officer at ATCO Limited in Calgary, William I.M. Turner, PCC Industrial Corporation in Montreal. I think that's Power Corporation, is it? I don't know. And J.H. Warren, former Canadian ambassador to the United States. And again, those are just the names they were collecting back in the 90s. Who knows which one of these guys are still kicking around. Okay, so we are close to the end of the reading, and here we are coming up on the 2-hour mark. I'm trying to keep this as concise as possible, but this is a chapter that I found to be very interesting, and it comes from the Canadian League of Rights back in 1972. There's something called the Canadian League of Rights. These were the guys back in the 70s seeing what was going on back then, and were trying to release publications and warn people about what was going on as far back as 1972. Okay, so listen to a voice from the past warn us about how we got to where we are right now and where we're going to continue going should it not be stopped and turned around. So let's just really tune in on this one. They say, the loudest cry in Canada today concerning foreign ownership is that of the Committee for an Independent Canada. Mel Hertig, federal Liberal candidate for Edmonton West in the recent election campaign, is one of the strongest Albertan as well as national advocates of an independent Canada and sits as a co-chairman on the committee. Mr. Hertig presents himself to the public as a rather fervent Canadian nationalist. We believe that the electors of Edmonton West and of Canada are not being told the complete story regarding the forces behind the movement to make Canadian ownership of industry a political issue of major importance. And so whether we're talking about actually having an independent Canada from, like, say, the British Crown Corporation or from China or the EU or whatever, that is a separate conversation from what this group, labeling itself in the 70s as a movement towards a true independent Canada. And what he's getting into is we found out that that was wolf in sheep's clothing. This was something way bigger. Okay. And look at the forces behind it. So let's get into it. To understand fully the nature and identity of these forces, we must go back to the evening of April 25th, 1968. 1968, when 100 of the world's most powerful and influential men began slipping secretly into Mont-Tremblant province of Quebec. And I've been to Mont-Tremblant. It's a really nice little skiing town. But yeah, it's kind of a ritzy area. And of course, that's an interesting place for them to go and meet. The event was the 1968 session of the Bilderberg Conference, a phenomena all the more extraordinary for the fact that it has been enacted every year since 1954, always with a secrecy unrivaled in the political functioning of Western society. The first meeting in 1954 took place in the Bilderberg Hotel in Oosterbeek, Netherlands, hence the name adopted by the conferences. The chairman of the Bilderberg meeting is always Prince Bernhard of the Royal Dutch Shell Oil Corporation, of strong Rothschild interest. Always sitting at his side as co-chairman is David Rockefeller, head of Chase Manhattan, the world's largest international bank, and of the Standard Oil empire. So the same dudes are all showing up in the 60s in Mont-Tremblant, Canada. The most fantastic thing is that 100 of the world's most powerful men could gather in Mont-Tremblant for 3 days to ponder the fate of Canada, 1968, and effectively keep their activities as secret. Where was the press? Incredibly, secrecy was maintained. And from the power centers of Europe and North America came an almost incalculable aggregation of wealth, academic brilliance, and political power. Don't forget about the Cecil Rhodes roundtable setup from the last show and how that plays into how they got to this stage. The guest list of this 1968 World Affairs Conference reads like a who's who in the world, wide wealth and influence. In addition to Prince Bernhard and David Rockefeller, top bankers and industrialists from 21 nations attended. A preponderating share of the participants were international bankers. In addition to David Rockefeller were Baron Edmund de Rothschild of the House of Rothschild, Wilfred Baumgartner, honorary governor of Bank of France, Louis Camus, president of Bank of Brussels, C. Douglas Dillon, president of Dillon, Reed and Company, Alan T. Lambert, chairman and president of Toronto Dominion Bank. And by the way, the chairmen of TD Bank have always been Bilderbergers. Robert McNamara, president of World Bank. Louis Raminsky, governor of the Bank of Canada, and Marcus Wallenberg, vice chairman, Stockholm, in the Stockholm Bank. From Canada came such notables as Paul Martin, there he is again, Lester Pearson, Pearson Airport, La Presse editor Claude Ryan, and newly appointed Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He would have been newly elected back at the end of the 60s there. Because of the secrecy and extreme security surrounding the meetings of these internationalist conspirators, their actual nature and intent have remained an almost total mystery to the external world. However, just recently a leak was made, and 2 of the 1968 secret documents of the Mont Tremblant Conference reached the outside. These documents are designated confidential and not for publication either in whole or in part. One document, a book of 36 pages, explained the organization, listed all past participants, and briefly described the agenda of the previous conferences. The other document, Additional Agenda Item 1, was entitled The Internationalization of Business. This second document consisted of 10 legal-sized sheets and dealt entirely with the question of foreign ownership of industry, referred to in the document as the internationalization of business. The document outlines the Bilderberg plan to involve Canadian financiers in their operations relating to foreign, corporations, relating to foreign corporations in advance of the general Canadian public becoming shareholders. In the words of the document, perhaps forms of holding companies could, in certain cases, provide sufficiently malleable solutions. Such holding companies would, for example, regroup and control the ensemble of major American companies and Canadian interests. This document also clearly states the Bilderberg intent to establish ownership of Canadian industry in the hands of Canadian financiers, but controlled through loans from international financial interests. Historically, the foregoing strategy has been that employed by socialist and communist nationalization of industry in the countries where they have seized control. So this is interesting. Speaking in Edmonton, Alberta, William Kashtan, leader of the Canadian Communist Party, upheld the policy of capital borrowing from the United States, declaring, "We're against foreign ownership, not foreign investment." This was back in 1972. The parallel with Bilderberg policy is immediately apparent. So there seems to be this connection going on. Under such a proposal, while ownership would appear to be in the hands of Canadians, the ultimate control would reside with the international bankers. The interest that would be payable on such debt capital to these international bankers would far exceed the amount now taken out of Canada in the form of profit, and this accumulating debt would be impossible to repay. In the light of the increasingly evident agreement of Reds and bankers on the policy of centralized control or total monopoly, the perceptive, if perhaps novel, claim that communism is simply the theory of modern business extended to its logical conclusion is thoroughly vindicated. That is, both finance and socialism and communism have a common objective, mainly the monopoly control advanced or achieved through centralization of power. A lot of words to get through there, but just to highlight what he's pointing out here and what they're pointing out in this article is that there seemed to be collusion, which is something I've been talking about for a while now, between the socialists, so the Fabians, the communists, and the high financiers, the crony super capitalists that Quigley warned us about. They're colluding for the same objective. So why would the communists be colluding with the capitalists? Why would the communists have anything to do with someone like a David Rockefeller if we are to take what we've been given about those organizations and those people on face value? Well, you can't take it on face value. That's the point. The whole point is that they look at this, the real sharks, they look at these different isms and systems that everybody, falls for as just a means to an end. And the means to an end is centralization of power. That's why they advocate for it. They don't believe in the commie bullshit or the socialist utopia. They believe in power, and they know you believe in it. It was written for you by their predecessors. Came out of the secret society world. I've already covered that. So Just want to draw your attention to these connections and how Canada was right in the thick of all of this. So he's wrapping up here. Thus, he says there is no real contradiction in the action of Mr. Eric Kierans, past president of the Montreal Stock Exchange and former federal Liberal cabinet minister of long-standing socialist leanings, in announcing his support for the new Democratic Party, the NDP, candidate in his riding back in October 1972 federal election. Socialism, here it is. Socialism serves finance as the ultimate instrument of power centralization. Let me do that again. Socialism serves finance as the ultimate instrument of power centralization. That is the only reason the high table promotes it. They don't believe in it. They know the calculation problems and the disaster. They are on that team specifically because of the disaster it causes, because out of chaos can a new order be created. Hopefully we understand that now. Couple more here, guys. We're almost done. We do not know exactly what transpired following the 1968 Bilderberg meeting, other than that a few months later, an organization called the Committee for an Independent Canada came into being. Walter Gordon, a former Bilderberg participant, emerged as Chairman Claude Ryan, editor of La Presse, and a 1968 Bilderberg participant assumed the position of co-chairman. How coincidental. On a recent, i.e. early 1972 radio show in Edmonton, Jim Roberts' open line program, Mel Hurtig stated that Canada requires a form of national development fund to marshal the savings of Canadians. Did Mr. Hurtig mean this to be the holding companies referred to in the secret Bilderberg document? On the same program, Mr. Hurtig also stated that he opposed equity and investment in Canada by Americans, but favored instead debt capital. Was not Mr. Hurtig really saying that he opposed the small American stakeholder investing in Canada and favored instead the contracting of an unpayable debt to international bankers? Don't forget too, guys, that it was under Pierre Elliott Trudeau that the Canadian banking system was basically transferred to Basel, Switzerland with the Bank of International Settlements. And that's who owns our debt as Canadians. All right. So we're on that leash when it comes to the international banks. And that was done under Trudeau. I spoke to Paul Hellyer. He was there when it was signed off. He confirmed it. We concede that an alleged relationship between the Bilderberg conferences of 1968, the formation of the CIC, the appointment of two Bilderberg participants as chief at the CIC, and Mel Hurtig's statements, which parallel Bilderberg policy, might be discounted as only coincidental. However, the shocking and revealing events of 1971 appear to rule out all possibility of coincidence. On the 22nd of April, 1971, 85 of the world's top men again began their secret journeys to a common destination. On this occasion, it was Rockefeller's Woodstock Inn at Woodstock, Vermont. Throughout April 23rd, 24th, and 25th, these international conspirators again debated the fate of the world. Prince Bernhard and David Rockefeller presided as usual. Baron Edmund de Rothschild was again in attendance. Also attending were a number of important members of the Rockefeller-controlled semi-secret Council on Foreign Relations. And we went into the CFR in the last show, if you want to catch up on that. Among them being Professor Henry Kissinger, officer of the Rockefeller Fund, former staff member of the CFR, and foreign policy advisor to American President Richard Nixon. From Canada, unnoticed, slipped in Anthony Griffin, president of Triarch Corporation, Paul Lehman, president of Alcan, Robert Bourassa, premier of Quebec, and Donald MacDonald, and a bunch of others. Donald MacDonald. And I think, is there more? Oh, yeah. Okay, we'll get through this. He does name everybody here. Minister of Defense. So that was who the Minister of Defense was at the time. Abraham Borstein, professor of political science at the University of Toronto, and chairman of the Committee for an Independent Canada. So see, it brings us back to this independent Canada that was just a front for this movement. Because of the extreme security maintained at the Woodstock meeting, no one on the outside knows exactly what was discussed or what directives may have been issued. What is known is that soon after this secret conclave, Abraham Rothstein somehow came into possession of a highly classified cabinet document of the Trudeau government in Ottawa. This secret document was the Herb Gray Report, which dealt with foreign ownership in Canada. Rothstein, a prominent socialist and mentor of Mel Watkins of the radical New Democratic Party Waffle Group, published this report in Canadian Forum, the Socialist Intellectual Journal for Canada, which he was the editor. This study makes no accusations, but it does question the coincidental nature of the relationships between the mysterious 1968 Bilderberg Conference concerning foreign ownership, the subsequent formation of the Committee for an Independent Canada, the installment of important Bilderberg participants at the head of the CIC, Mel Herding's zealous promotion of the CIC and his statements on behalf of the CIC, which parallel major Bilderberg policies, Professor Rothstein's participation in the furtive 1971 Bilderberg Woodstock meeting, and upon his return to Canada, publication of the secret Herb Gray Report, not to mention the number of key liberals connected with this Rockefeller-Rothschild internationalist Bilderberg conspiracy, including the man who received early and strenuous public support from Mr. Mel Herding, vis-a the present Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Elliott Trudeau himself. The question may be asked, is it possible for persons who advocate nationalism at the tops of their voices to be in reality internationalists? So again, they're wolves in sheep's clothing. They're going to walk up and say what you want, but they're all shaking hands at Bilderberg with the top cheese, right? Who want international government. Perhaps the following quotation can shed some light on this disturbing matter. Here it is. It is just because we are really attacking the principle of local sovereignty that we keep on protesting our loyalty to it so loudly. The harder we press our attack upon the idol, the more pains we take to keep its priests and devotees in a fool's paradise, lapped in a false sense of security, which will inhibit them from taking up arms in their idol's defense. We are at present working discreetly, but with all our might, to wrest this mysterious political force called sovereignty out of the clutches of the local national states of our world. And all the time we are denying with our lips what we are doing with our hands. These extracts are taken from addresses given in Copenhagen in 1931 by Professor Arnold Toynbee. We read this also in the last show. English Fabian socialist and director of studies of the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London, England. It's all a big club, guys. The Canadian counterpart of the Royal Institute is its affiliate of common origin, the Canadian Institute of International Affairs. Mr. Mel Herding admitted while campaigning in Edmonton at a University of Alberta federal election forum back in October of 72 that he had been a member of the Canadian Institute of International Affairs. And I don't think it's named that anymore, guys. I think it got renamed. I believe it's the Canadian Council of Chief Executives. It might have even been renamed since then. But he's continuing here. Although under questioning from the floor, he claimed that his membership had lapsed. In the United States, the counterpart to the Royal and Canadian Institutes is the powerful Rockefeller-controlled Council on Foreign Relations. In conclusion, the authors of this study wish to point out that the recent focus upon foreign ownership as a major political issue in Canada has not been conceived or instigated by rank-and-file Canadian citizens, but by internationalists like the Rockefeller and the Rothschild. Are Canadians to be so foolish as to imagine that these power-centralizing individuals are primarily and truly concerned about the welfare of Canada? Like, this is where you really got to start asking these questions. And you got to ask these questions about your carnies and all these other people, right? Your premiers, when they're sending all your money to other countries to help them build, while our infrastructure's failing, while it's hard to pay for groceries and cost of living, right? It's absolutely insane in this country right now. But they're just going as business as usual. They're not listening to the electorate. They're not listening to the people. So who are they listening to? Well, we're going back in history to give you just a sketch, just an idea about how this went down in the past that has brought us up to this present right now. And what they're doing is they're not working for Canadian peoples and their interests. They're working for the international order that has been worked on for over 100 years at least. And they're just pointing that out. I can't believe I didn't spot. This is back in 72, guys. They were looking at this, these guys. So these men are internationalists, and surely they have demonstrated conclusively by word and action that their plan is to internationalize every nation in the world under their own firm economic and political control. Mel Herding has stated that he believes the electorate will pay far more attention to individual candidates and their respective policies during the current federal election campaign. In fairness, Mr. Herding must have expected to publicly subject his own policies and slogans to full and open critical analysis. A sovereign Canada is an independent Canada, but an independent Canada is not necessarily a sovereign Canada. So here we go. Some selected writings from this book, and there's so many more. And I'm just trying to keep doing this research on these bigger themes that I've been presenting on and continue to show you. You're going to keep finding from people who didn't even know each other that were researching this independently from different countries. Here we've got some groups in Canada in the 70s, even earlier in the 60s, later in the 80s, the 90s, all the way through till now. And then other guys in America researching the same thing and coming at it from their angle, and other people in Europe researching the same thing. You got your Dr. John Coleman's. You had the guy's book in the beginning, comes from Australia, researching it from that angle and noticing that same movement happening in the Australian Parliament. And I know you guys listening from Australia know exactly what I'm talking about. You're in the same boat as us in Canada because you're being captured. You've been captured. That's the tale. If you want to boil all that down, if that was a little too much info, right? Just sum it all up. We've been captured by highly powerful agencies and roundtable groups that have their own agenda for their power, not for your power. It's for their power. And in order to achieve that, they just have mastered the sales pitch of how to convince you by way of mind control that their agenda is your agenda. Isn't that what every manipulator does? Isn't that what every cult leader does? Isn't that what every tyrannical figure in history does? My agenda is your agenda. I'm fighting for you, the people. That's what they all say. That's what you would say. But if we're denying with our lips what we're doing with our hands, as we constantly hear these cats talk about, and we have another agenda that we can't really tell the entire world, we'll communicate it amongst ourselves and our chief men and women in our enterprise. But we're not going to put this on The View. We're not going to put this on the CBC News. You can go through media reports and get little snippets, and then you're going to have to paste it all together to figure some of this out. But they're never going to tell you this. This isn't going to be advertised. It's going to be advertised in a totally different way to you. And that's why they chose climate change, equity, all the things, the sustainable development, right? The digital banking system, the surveillance state, the new normal, out with the old, in with the new, but the new isn't good for you. It's good for them. Notice how that always works? So what I'm trying to do is go back and find validation from disconnected sources that are all seeing the same thing from different angles. And when you start doing that, your investigation becomes a hell of a lot more powerful. And then when you keep getting validation, as we are, by the actions and statements and policies of our government, which is seemingly doing everything it can to sell us out to both foreign and domestic enemies of this country who don't want this country to exist as we Canadians think it exists. They want a new normal. And for people that get bored really quickly, that sounds great. Oh, a new world order would be amazing because the current world order is really bad. But don't you realize that that's part of it? You got to make people beg you for the new world order. That's the real power. That's the real genius move here. The evil genius move. That's the chess move. You enslave yourself. This is some Sun Tzu shit. Let the enemy destroy themselves. And then we move in and we take over. That's how it works. So we rig the markets. We crash the system. We flood you with mass immigration of unvetted people from all over the world that are now committing all kinds of violent acts on your streets. We put the squeeze on you with less jobs, less income, highly inflated pricing. Your dollar has less value. There's wars happening here. We're going to go donate all your money over to these foreign wars or whatever it is going to be happening. And then you don't notice. And then you start to go, we need a new order. They're right. David Rockefeller's right. The round table's right. We definitely need a new order. Look at this place. It's corrupt. It's backwards. Can't even buy a home anymore. Kids aren't getting educated in schools. And they go, yeah, you're right there. You're good noticing. We should have a new order. Just so happens we've been wanting that this entire time and kind of rigged the game so that you would eventually side with us and start voting in exactly what we wanted you to vote in, but that we know you would never vote in if you read the fine print. That's why it's secret. That's why we got to do all this cloak and dagger bullshit in order to bring it in. If it was truly what they all say it is about love, light, and equality, and Canada strong, and we're going to remake and make it better, hope and change, all the things you love to hear. If it was really about those things, why don't we see some bloody hope and change for the good? Why don't we see some actual Canada strong? Why don't we see some actual progress instead of progressivism, which is not progress? It's about moving towards a totally different system than what you've been raised with. That is completely opposite of your value structure. And the value structure that was fought and bled and died for by our forefathers to preserve for future generations, that we all believe we're living in. But that's what you do. You just got to change the water in the fish tank to change the fish. You don't need to change each fish. You just got to change the water in the fish tank. The fish will adapt accordingly. And that's how they did it. So at the very least, guys, this is the theory. This is another theory that will help explain a lot of the anomalies that people are really wrestling with. I can see it in the comments. I can see it in the commentary. I watch a lot of I try to keep my ear to the ground. I go into these spaces. I watch the top guys. I try to listen to what they're saying. And many do great work and they bring up a lot of great points, but they're all seemingly confused about how this happened. And so who do we blame? Who do we blame? What really went wrong? And the thing is the wool was pulled over all of our eyes. So this isn't, this is just something to recognize, just like you would recognize that maybe you're in a toxic friendship or marriage relationship or spousal relationship with someone who's an abuser that you didn't notice for a long time. You suddenly go, wow, when I really rethink the way they've been treating me, it's been quite abusive. What was it in me that blinded me to that abuse? Well, the fact that they are really good at being a wolf in sheep's clothing and using basically the basic version of these persuasion techniques that your government has learned and perfected and is using on the entire population in one way, shape, or form. And they're doing it in service of something much higher. Your politicians don't swear oaths of allegiance to you in Canada. They swear oaths of allegiances to the crown. Remember that. The ring, the crown, right? And the crown has been replaced now with the ring of power. And that is something that is not run in Canada by Canadians. There may have been Canadians like Maurice Strong and Desmarais and some of these guys involved, but make no mistake, there's nothing Canadian about the agenda that your Canadian politicians are enacting bit by bit, whether they're in full knowledge of what they're doing or not. Some of these guys, I like how they pointed out, some of these people are ideological adherents. They drank Kool-Aid. They believe in it, right? And because they believe in it, they're acting on it. And that's enough. Other people, maybe there's blackmail going on. Maybe there's threats going on. Maybe there's something even more going on. Or maybe there are a lot of people that are also in a certain level of knowledge of what's happening, right? Those are all possibilities. I'll let you speculate. But I just hope that at least on my show here, I can give you guys a little tour of the research done in the past that's actually starting to pan out in many ways, aside from some mistakes and some, but it's starting to, in general, pan out right now. And the more you pay attention to it, and the more you study it, the more you're going to be shocked at how accurate this analysis really is. And It's only when we understand fully what we're dealing with that we can find a solution. So all the people saying this is the solution, that's the solution, no, this is the solution, and everybody right now in the Canadian political sphere is all arguing about what's the solution. Unfortunately, most of the commentaries I've heard, there's a lot of people that are missing these points of data. And so I'm just here to help say, hey, should we consider this research as well? Should we look a little bit further behind the curtain than just some local politics going on in Canada? Maybe it's a bit bigger and deeper and wider than you thought. And when we get there, then I think some actual viable solutions can present themselves. And the good news is, just like I started out with that whole thing about, what your potential as a human being is that this agenda is not the only thing that exists, and it isn't like it has to succeed. The only reason it succeeds is because everybody goes along with it and doesn't challenge or question it. And that can be turned around. At least you can turn that around for yourself, right? And then everybody's going to have to see what's best for their own personal lives and circumstances, right? But first step is awareness. That's why I'm here. I think that we also live in an exciting time. The positive as well is that we live in an exciting time where you have access to this information in a way where you can cross-examine different data points in real time. There's so many tools that you have at your disposal to really get up to speed very quickly. Whereas it took me like 20 years, it's going to take everybody listening to this. Like if you use all the tools and you go to the sources, you could get up to speed in lightning speed comparatively. And that will definitely help. And then the more awareness that's spread, the more positive action can be taken towards doing this. And the good news is the world is starting to wake up to this in one way or another. And more people are recognizing that whether it's exactly this or something similar, there's something going on behind the scenes that is not in the public domain. And that's coming out more and more. And so let's hope that continues to come out into the light. It's seen for what it is, that it's rejected, and that it is conquered, and that truth and freedom win in the end. That's my goal. I hope that's your goal. And all we can do is keep marching forward and continuing to expose this for what it is, which is a big fat lie that we don't need to believe anymore. And we can start pursuing actual productive measures to ensure freedom and prosperity for our children and grandchildren, which is the mission. That's the mission. It's for them. And I think we can do it. And I think we are doing it. And I hope this can be a small contribution to at least help give you a little more context to some of the bigger themes that I've been presenting and that others have been presenting. And I've got a lot more to come your way on this front. So thanks, everybody. I hope you liked it. Please share this out if it's valuable. Think of this as a collection of shows, like a series that they all kind of fit together. And I hope it helps you in your research. So stay tuned. We'll have more coming soon. Thanks, everybody, for jumping in.